Lucas Reed watched the woman across from him scan the restaurant menu, her eyes lingering on the prices. In exactly 4 minutes, his credit card would decline. In 6, she'd make an excuse and leave. He'd timed this dance 53 times before. 53 women who claimed money didn't matter, until it did. But tonight, something would go terribly wrong with his experiment. Tonight, the woman who paid his bill with money meant for her brother's medication would refuse to leave. And Lucas Reed, who thought he'd designed the perfect test for love, would discover he'd actually built the perfect trap for himself. If you want to see how far Lucas's cruel experiment takes him down a path he never expected, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Now let me tell you what happens when a man tries to test love and ends up testing his own heart instead. The Manhattan skyline glittered behind floor-to-ceiling windows as Lucas Reed stood in his daughter's doorway, watching Sophie sleep. At 7 years old, she still clutched the stuffed rabbit her mother had given her 3 years ago, back when Jessica still pretended to care about being a parent, back before the divorce attorney had tallied up Lucas's net worth and Jessica's eyes had lit up like Christmas morning. The settlement had cost him $18 million. Sophie's therapy bills were still climbing. And somewhere in the expensive silence of his penthouse, Lucas had made a decision that would reshape the next year of his life. He would prove, once and for all, that love was just another transaction where money determined the final price. "Daddy." Sophie's voice was sleepy, small. "Are you okay?" Lucas crossed to her bed, smoothing her dark hair. She had his eyes, gray and too observant for someone so young. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." You have that look again, the one you get when you're thinking about mommy. The accuracy of her observation hit harder than it should have. At 7, Sophie shouldn't have needed to learn how to read her father's grief, but divorce had made her fluent in adult pain, and Lucas hated that more than he hated Jessica's betrayal. "I was thinking," he said carefully, "about something else. About how people show they care." Sophie considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. "Mrs. Chen says people show they care by being there. She says showing up is the whole job." Mrs. Chen was Sophie's school counselor, and apparently she had more wisdom than most of the adults in Lucas's circles. "Mrs. Chen sounds smart." "She is. She also says you can't test if someone loves you. You just have to trust them." Sophie yawned, already drifting back toward sleep. "Like I trust you, Daddy, even when you're sad." Lucas kissed her forehead, throat tight. "Sweet dreams, Sophie." But as he returned to his own bedroom, to the California king bed that felt too large, too empty, Sophie's words echoed with uncomfortable precision. "You can't test if someone loves you." He disagreed. The past year had taught him exactly how to test love, and so far, love had failed every single time. But Lucas's experiment had begun simply enough. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, he'd agreed to a blind date his business partner had arranged. "She's different," Marcus had insisted. "Teacher, volunteers at an animal shelter. The real deal." The real deal had lasted exactly 1 dinner. When Lucas had suggested splitting the check, "Cash is tight this month, you know how it is," her smile had frozen, polite but distant. She'd left before dessert, citing an early morning. She never returned his calls. The second woman, a nurse Marcus swore cared more about people than paychecks, had made it through 2 dates before Lucas mentioned his studio apartment in Queens and his delivery job that barely covers the bills. She'd wished him luck finding someone more compatible with his lifestyle, and disappeared into the vast digital silence of unmade connections. By the 10th failed test, Lucas had refined his approach. He'd bought clothes from thrift stores, learned to time his card declines perfectly, mastered the art of looking financially strained without appearing completely destitute. He wasn't pretending to be homeless. That would have been too cruel. He was simply pretending to be ordinary, average, a single father struggling to make ends meet in an expensive city. The results were remarkably consistent. Women who claimed money didn't matter invariably discovered it did, usually within 3 dates, often within 2. They'd check their phones more frequently. Their laughter would sound forced. They'd mention ex-boyfriends who were doing really well now, or casually bring up their own career ambitions in ways that highlighted Lucas's apparent lack of them. "You're becoming cynical," Marcus had told him after the 20th failed test. This isn't healthy, Luke. They'd been in Lucas's office, the real office, in the building Lucas owned, where his nameplate read CEO, and his view encompassed half of Lower Manhattan. Here, in his actual life, Lucas commanded a commercial real estate empire worth $400 million. Here, people courted his favor and calculated his net worth and treated him like every word was gospel. I'm not cynical, Lucas had replied. I'm empirical. I'm collecting data. You're punishing every woman you meet for what Jessica did. I'm protecting Sophie and myself. Lucas had turned from the window, jaw set. When I find someone who stays even when she thinks I have nothing, that's when I'll know it's real. Marcus had shaken his head. And what happens when you find her? When you discover someone who passes your test? You think she's going to be thrilled when she learns you've been lying for months? She'll understand. If she really loves me for who I am, the money won't change anything. The lie will. But Lucas had dismissed the warning. He was too committed to his experiment, too convinced of its necessity. The world had taught him that everything had a price, especially love. He was simply insisting on truth in advertising. The 54th date had been arranged through a friend of a friend, the kind of 6 degrees of separation setup that felt safely distant from his real life. Her name's Emma, his friend David had said. Works at that diner near my place. I don't know, Luke? She's genuine. No games. Lucas had learned to be skeptical of words like genuine and different. They all seemed genuine until the check came. They all seemed different until the money did. But he'd agreed to the date anyway. One more data point in his growing collection of evidence that love was fundamentally transactional. He'd chosen a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, nice enough to seem like he was trying, cheap enough that the bill wouldn't exceed $80. He'd worn his carefully selected struggling guy outfit. Jeans from Target, a button-down with a frayed collar, shoes that were clean but worn. He'd left his watch at home. His wallet contained exactly one credit card, rigged to decline after the first attempt. Emma Cole had arrived 10 minutes early. Lucas had watched her from the bar, taking mental notes the way he'd learned to do. She was younger than him, late 20s, maybe 30. Dark blonde hair pulled into a simple ponytail. Minimal makeup. She wore a sundress that looked inexpensive but well-maintained, paired with a cardigan that had been mended at one elbow. Her shoes were flats, practical. Her purse was large, the kind designed for carrying essentials rather than making statements. She looked tired. Not in a way that suggested poor sleep, but in a way that suggested life had been demanding lately, and she'd been meeting those demands without much time for herself. When Lucas approached, her smile was warm but cautious. Lucas? Emma, thanks for coming. He'd extended his hand and her grip was firm, brief. Have you been waiting long? Just got here. Traffic wasn't too bad. They'd settled into the booth and Lucas had launched into his practiced routine, the one designed to establish his financial limitations early and naturally. This place is great, he'd said, scanning the menu. David recommended it, said the portions are huge, so we definitely get our money's worth. Most women would have given him a look at that phrase, our money's worth. It was a small tell, a hint that he was thinking about cost. Most women would have immediately insisted they could pay for themselves or suggested somewhere else. Emma had simply nodded. The lasagna's really good. I've eaten here a few times. Yeah? What do you do? David mentioned you work nearby. I'm a waitress at Mike's Diner, about 6 blocks from here. She'd said it without shame or apology, just fact. Late shifts, mostly. The tips are better after 10. That's got to be exhausting. It can be. She'd met his eyes, and Lucas had been surprised by the directness of her gaze. But it's flexible, which I need right now. What about you? David was pretty vague about what you do. This was the moment where Lucas usually deployed his cover story, the one about working in deliveries, about the unpredictable schedule and the tight budget. But something about Emma's straightforward manner had made the lies feel heavier than usual. I'm between things right now, he'd said, which was technically true in that he was between his real life and his fabricated one. Doing some consulting work, freelance stuff. It's feast or famine, you know? Emma had nodded with what seemed like genuine understanding. I do know. My brother's been freelancing too, computer stuff. Some months are great, others are scary. You have a brother? Yeah, Tyler. He's 17. Her expression had softened in a way Lucas recognized, the particular tenderness that came from being responsible for someone you loved. He lives with me, has since our parents died 4 years ago. The information had landed with surprising weight. Lucas had expected many things from this date, but not that. I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly hard. It was. It is. Emma had glanced down at her menu, but not before Lucas caught the flash of old grief in her eyes. But Tyler's a good kid. We manage. That's a lot to take on, raising a teenager on your own. You're raising a daughter on your own, right? David mentioned that. Lucas had felt something shift in his chest, not quite guilt, but adjacent to it. She'd done her homework, just like he had. But where Lucas's research had been strategic, designed to protect himself, Emma's felt more like simple courtesy, learning enough to make conversation. Being interested because that's what you did when you agreed to meet someone. Sophie, she's 7, custody is split, but he'd trailed off, unsure how much truth to mix into his lies. Let's just say her mother's not very present. That's hard on kids. Tyler's therapist says. Emma had stopped herself, looking almost embarrassed. Sorry, you probably don't want to hear about my brother's therapy on a first date. No, it's okay. Sophie has a therapist too. What does Tyler say? And just like that, they'd been talking, really talking. Not the performative dance of first date conversation, but actual discussion about actual things that mattered. Emma had shared how Tyler's disability, cerebral palsy that affected his mobility and fine motor skills, had shaped both their lives after their parents' accident. How he was brilliant with computers but struggled with physical tasks. How she'd become his legal guardian at 26, sacrificing plans for college and career advancement to make sure he had stability. Lucas had found himself sharing more about Sophie than he'd intended. About the divorce, about Jessica's increasing absence, about how hard it was to watch his daughter learn that one parent's love was conditional on convenience. Sophie sounds wonderful, Emma had said when their food arrived. It's obvious you adore her. I do. She's everything. That's good. Emma had taken a bite of her lasagna, thoughtful. Tyler tells me I need to have a life outside of being his sister. He worries I gave up too much. Did you? She'd considered the question seriously. I gave up different, not less. I thought I'd go to culinary school, maybe open a bakery someday. Now I'm thinking maybe a food truck, something more flexible. Dreams change. That's not the same as giving up. Lucas had been struck by her pragmatism, by the absence of self-pity. She wasn't romanticizing her situation or playing martyr. She was simply living her life, adapting to circumstances, finding new paths when old ones closed. The conversation had flowed through dinner with surprising ease. Emma was funny in a quiet way, observant without being judgmental. She'd ask questions that suggested genuine interest rather than social obligation. When Lucas mentioned Sophie's love of books, Emma had recommended a series her brother had enjoyed at that age. When he talked about the challenge of single parenting, she'd shared strategies that had worked with Tyler. It had been the best first date Lucas had experienced in over a year, which meant it was time for the test. When the server brought the check, Lucas had reached for his wallet with practiced reluctance. "Let me get this," he'd said, pulling out his rigged credit card. "We can split it," Emma had offered. "That's fair." "No, I asked you out. My treat." He'd handed the card to the server, then continued their conversation as if nothing significant was happening. This was the crucial moment, the point where most women began showing signs of discomfort or judgment. Emma had simply continued eating her last bite of garlic bread, still engaged in their discussion about whether 7 was too young for Harry Potter. When the server returned, her expression apologetic, Lucas had felt the familiar tightening in his chest. "I'm sorry, sir, but this card was declined. Do you have another one?" He'd made a show of checking his wallet, his expression carefully arranged into embarrassed frustration. "That's strange. There should be money on this one." He'd looked at Emma, watching for the tell, the slight withdrawal, the flicker of calculation. "I'm really sorry about this. I've got it." Emma had already pulled out her own wallet, extracting a debit card with the efficiency of someone used to handling small emergencies. She'd handed it to the server with a smile. No problem. Lucas had protested, as he always did. No, Emma, I can't let you. It's fine, really. Her tone had been easy, unconcerned. You can get the next one. The next one. Those 3 words had hit differently than they should have, because usually, when women paid after his card declined, there was no next one. There were polite excuses and unmade plans, and the slow fade of someone who'd decided this wasn't worth the trouble. But Emma had said it like she meant it, like she'd already decided there would be a next time, and the money was irrelevant to that decision. They'd left the restaurant together, and Lucas had found himself suggesting a walk despite his usual protocol of ending dates quickly after the payment test. There's a park a few blocks from here. Would you want to walk a bit, if you don't have to rush home? Emma had checked her phone. I've got about an hour before I should head back. Tyler's okay on his own for a while, but I like to be there when he's going to sleep. They'd walked to Prospect Park, and in the soft summer twilight, Lucas had felt something dangerous beginning to form. Because Emma didn't act like someone who'd just paid for a date she'd expected her companion to cover. She acted like someone who'd simply handled a minor inconvenience and moved on to more interesting topics. She'd asked about Sophie's school, about what Lucas liked to do with his daughter. She'd shared stories about Tyler's wit and his determination to be independent despite his physical limitations. She'd laughed at Lucas's description of Sophie's elaborate imaginary worlds, and her laughter had sounded genuine, unforced. When they'd finally paused by the park entrance, Emma had turned to him with that same direct gaze from earlier. I had a really nice time tonight, Lucas. Me too. And he'd meant it, which was terrifying. Can I see you again? I'd like that. She'd pulled out her phone. Are you free this weekend? I'm off Saturday afternoon. Lucas had agreed before he'd fully thought it through, because he'd needed more data, he'd told himself. One date wasn't conclusive. The real test would be whether Emma continued to stay when the dates continued to be cheap, when the financial limitations became a pattern rather than a one-time embarrassment. But as he'd watched Emma walk toward the subway station, her ponytail swaying, her cardigan pulled tight against the evening chill, Lucas had felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Dangerous, complicated hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally found someone who could pass his test. He'd had no idea that the test was about to become far more complicated than he'd ever intended. The second date had been coffee at a chain cafe, Lucas's choice, deliberately casual and inexpensive. Emma had arrived in jeans and a simple blue shirt, her hair down this time, and Lucas had been struck again by how present she seemed. Not checking her phone constantly, not looking around to see who else might be watching, just there, focused on him and their conversation. How's Tyler doing? He'd asked as they'd settled into a corner table. Emma's face had lit up. Good. He's got this summer coding camp thing. It's online, but he's loving it. He's designing some kind of game about space exploration. That's impressive. He's brilliant. Honestly, sometimes I think he's the one taking care of me instead of the other way around. She'd wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, thoughtful. He's been encouraging me to go out more, date more. He says I use him as an excuse to avoid having a life. Is he right? Maybe a little. Emma had smiled, but there'd been something sad in it. It's easier to focus on taking care of someone else than to think about what I want. Less scary. Lucas had understood that more than he wanted to admit. Focusing on Sophie, on protecting her from future disappointment, was easier than examining his own broken places. What do you want, Emma? She'd considered the question seriously, as she seemed to consider everything. I want Tyler to have opportunities. I want him to go to college if he wants to have the technology he needs, to not feel limited by his disability. She'd paused. And I guess I want to feel like my life is mine again, not in a bad way. I don't resent Tyler. But I want to be Emma who has a brother with CP, not just Tyler's sister who gave up everything. Those things don't sound mutually exclusive. They're not. But time and money make them feel that way sometimes. She'd looked at him over her coffee cup. What do you want, Lucas? He'd thought about lying, about staying in character, but something about Emma's honesty had demanded equal authenticity. I want Sophie to grow up knowing she's worth more than what people can get from her. I want her to understand that love should be unconditional, even though her mother taught her otherwise. And what do you want for yourself? The question had caught him off guard, because his entire experiment had been about what he wanted: proof, certainty, protection. But when Emma asked it, Lucas had realized he didn't have a good answer that didn't involve his daughter, or his company, or his defensive measures against future pain. I don't know, he'd admitted. I used to know. Before the divorce, I had plans. Now I mostly just try to make sure nothing that bad happens again. Emma had reached across the table, her hand covering his briefly. The touch had been light, brief, but it had sent electricity up Lucas's arm. That sounds exhausting, living defensively all the time. It's safe. Safe and good aren't always the same thing. They'd talked for 2 hours, long past the point where their coffee had gone cold. Lucas had learned that Emma read mystery novels, that she'd been a competitive swimmer in high school, that she made elaborate birthday cakes for Tyler every year, despite having no formal training. Emma had learned that Lucas played piano badly, but enthusiastically, that he'd wanted to be an architect before business school, that he still missed his father who died when Lucas was in college. When they'd finally left the cafe, Emma had walked with him toward the subway. Same time next week? She'd asked. Actually, Lucas had heard himself say, are you free this Thursday? There's a free concert in the park. Nothing fancy, just local musicians. But Sophie would be with her mother, and I thought, I'd love to. Emma's smile had been genuine, warm. Text me the details. That had been the moment Lucas should have stopped, should have recognized that he was no longer conducting an experiment, but rather building something that would require truth, should have understood that Emma deserved better than his carefully constructed lies. But he'd continued instead, telling himself he needed more data, more certainty, telling himself that anyone could be kind for 2 dates. The real test would come with time, with the accumulation of cheap dinners and declined cards, and the mounting evidence that Lucas had nothing material to offer. So he'd kept lying, and Emma had kept staying. The 3rd date had been the concert, and Lucas had brought Sophie. He'd been nervous about it, more nervous than he'd been about any aspect of his experiment, because Sophie was real in a way that his fabricated financial struggles weren't. Sophie's reactions would be genuine, unscripted. If Emma was pretending interest in Lucas despite his apparent poverty, Sophie would sense it. Children were remarkably good at detecting inauthentic affection, but when Emma had met them at the park entrance, she'd crouched down to Sophie's level immediately, her smile warm but not overwhelming. Hi, Sophie. I'm Emma. Your dad's told me a lot about you. Sophie had studied Emma with serious eyes, taking her measure. Did he tell you about my rabbit? Mr. Flopsworth? He did. Your dad says Mr. Flopsworth is an excellent listener. Sophie had looked surprised that Emma had remembered the name. Lucas had mentioned it only in passing during their first date. He is. Do you have any stuffed animals? I have a bear named Captain. He's been with me since I was 5. That's a long time. 24 years? He's pretty worn out, but I can't imagine getting rid of him. Sophie had nodded with satisfaction, some internal judgment made and passed. She'd taken Emma's hand unselfconsciously as they'd walked toward the concert lawn. Daddy says you have a brother. I do. His name's Tyler. He's 17. That's old. Emma had laughed. It seems old when you're 7. When you're 30, 17 seems pretty young. They'd settled on the grass, Sophie between them, and Lucas had watched Emma interact with his daughter with growing confusion. Because Emma didn't act like women usually acted when they were trying to impress him through his child. She wasn't performative or overly enthusiastic. She simply talked to Sophie like Sophie was a person, asking real questions, listening to long answers about Sophie's summer reading list and her best friend's new puppy. When Sophie had eventually wandered over to the face-painting booth with $5 Lucas had given her, Emma had turned to him. She's wonderful, really smart. She is, sometimes too smart. She sees things I wish she didn't have to see. Like? Like when I'm sad, or angry, or scared. Lucas had pulled up a handful of grass, restless. The divorce was hard on her. Her mother promised a lot of things she didn't deliver on. That's cruel. Not just the breaking promises part, but doing it to a child. Jessica saw Sophie as an extension of me. a way to maintain connection to my money even after the marriage ended. The words had come out bitter, more honest than Lucas had intended. When I didn't bend to that manipulation, she lost interest in Sophie too. Emma had been quiet for a moment, watching Sophie at the face painting booth. My mom used to say that people show you who they are. The job isn't to change them or fix them. The job is to believe them and respond accordingly. That's harder than it sounds. Most worthwhile things are. The concert had been pleasant, local folk musicians, the kind of wholesome entertainment that felt far removed from Lucas's usual world of business dinners and networking events. Sophie had fallen asleep against Emma's shoulder during the second act, and Emma had adjusted her position carefully, letting Sophie rest while still watching the musicians. When the concert ended, Sophie had woken groggily, embarrassed. "I'm sorry I fell asleep." "Don't be sorry. Concerts are for enjoying however you want." Emma had helped Sophie stand, brushing grass from her dress. "Did you have fun before you dozed off?" "Yeah, the singing was pretty." Sophie had yawned, then looked at Emma with that too serious expression. "Are you Daddy's girlfriend?" Lucas had frozen, but Emma had handled it gracefully. "I'm your dad's friend. We're getting to know each other." "But you might be his girlfriend later?" "Maybe. Would that be okay with you?" Sophie had considered this with her characteristic gravity. "I think so. You're nice, and you don't talk to me like I'm a baby." "That's because you're not a baby. You're a person who happens to be 7. Sophie had nodded, satisfied, and taken both their hands as they'd walked back toward the subway. "Daddy, can Emma come to my birthday party next month?" Lucas had glanced at Emma, who'd smiled. "If your dad says it's okay, I'd love to come. When's your birthday?" "August 15th. I'll be 8. We're having it at the park because Daddy says—" Sophie had stopped herself, glancing up at Lucas uncertainly. "Because parks are free and fun," Lucas had finished, his chest tight. "And you said you wanted a picnic party." "Yeah, with the games and everything." Sophie had squeezed Emma's hand. "You should come. Tyler can come too, if he wants." "I'll ask him. He might like that." Later, after they'd put Sophie in a cab back to Jessica's apartment, Emma and Lucas had stood on the corner, neither quite ready to end the evening. "Your daughter is incredible," Emma had said. "You're doing a great job with her." "Some days I'm not sure about that." "Nobody's sure. That's parenting." Emma had smiled up at him. "But she's kind and curious and thoughtful. Those things don't happen by accident." Lucas had wanted to kiss her then, but he'd held back because kissing Emma would make everything more real, more complicated, would make it harder to maintain the distance he needed to keep his experiment objective. "Thank you for being so good with her," he'd said instead. "I wasn't being good with her. I was just being myself." Emma had checked her phone. "I should get home. Tyler's texted me 3 times asking if I'm okay. He worries about you. We worry about each other. That's what family does." She'd stepped closer, rising on her toes to kiss Lucas's cheek. "Text me. I had a really great time." And then she'd been gone, disappearing down the subway stairs, leaving Lucas standing on the corner with the feeling that his experiment was spinning rapidly out of his control. Over the next 3 weeks, Lucas saw Emma 6 more times, coffee dates, walks through different neighborhoods, one movie at a discount theater where the floors were sticky and the seats were worn, but Emma had laughed at all the right parts and hadn't complained once about the venue. Each time, Lucas had engineered some financial limitation. Cards that declined, forgotten wallets, checks he needed to split carefully. And each time, Emma had handled it with the same easy grace, paying when needed, suggesting free activities, never making Lucas feel inadequate or less than. She'd started meeting Sophie regularly, becoming a presence in their routine that felt natural rather than forced. She'd taught Sophie how to make friendship bracelets, had listened to endless stories about Sophie's imaginary kingdom, had helped with math homework without making Sophie feel stupid for needing help. Tyler had joined them twice, a thin teenager with his sister's warm eyes and a sharp wit that kept everyone laughing. He'd maneuvered his wheelchair with practiced ease, never letting his disability define the conversation, but not hiding it either. He'd traded programming jokes with Lucas, who was more technical than his fake profession suggested, and had bonded with Sophie over their shared love of fantasy novels. "You're good for Emma," Tyler had told Lucas quietly during one outing while Emma and Sophie were examining ducks at a pond. She's been alone for too long. She has you. I'm her brother. That's different. Tyler had watched his sister with obvious affection. She gave up a lot for me after our parents died. I want her to have something for herself. She doesn't seem to regret what she gave up. She doesn't. But that doesn't mean she shouldn't have more. Tyler had turned his chair to face Lucas directly. Don't hurt her. She acts tough, but she's softer than people think. The words had landed with unexpected weight, because Lucas knew he was going to hurt Emma. The only question was how much, and whether she'd forgive him when the truth finally emerged. But he'd kept lying, kept telling himself he needed more time, more evidence, kept pretending that what he felt for Emma was still part of an experiment rather than the simple, dangerous reality of falling in love. The shift had happened on their 10th date. They'd been in Emma's neighborhood, a working-class area of Queens where the buildings were tired but maintained, where neighbors knew each other's names and small businesses had survived for generations. Emma had invited Lucas over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta, and he'd brought wine from a corner store, the cheapest bottle that didn't look embarrassing. Tyler had answered the door, his wheelchair decorated with stickers from various science fiction franchises. Hey, Lucas, Emma's in the kitchen. Fair warning, she's trying a new recipe, so we're either eating really well or ordering pizza. The apartment had been small but meticulously maintained. Secondhand furniture arranged carefully, walls painted in warm colors, photographs everywhere. Tyler and Emma, their parents, various moments of captured joy and connection. Medical equipment occupied one corner of the living room, integrated into the space rather than hidden. Emma had emerged from the kitchen, flour on her cheek, smiling. I'm making ravioli from scratch because apparently I've lost my mind and forgotten I'm not Italian. Need help? You can keep me company. She'd handed him a glass of water, no wine glasses, he'd noticed, and had felt absurdly touched that she'd assumed the cheap wine was fine for them to drink from mugs. Tyler's setting up a movie for after dinner. In the small kitchen, Lucas had watched Emma work with practiced efficiency. Her movements were economical, born from years of waitressing and making do with limited space and resources. She'd rolled dough with a borrowed pasta maker, her hands sure, despite her earlier joke about incompetence. How long have you lived here? Lucas had asked. 4 years since our parents died. Emma had glanced around the kitchen, affectionate. It's small, but it works for us. Tyler's room is bigger than mine, which is important. He needs space for his equipment and his computer setup. You gave him the master bedroom. Of course. He's the teenager. Teenagers need space. She'd looked at Lucas, curious. You sound surprised. I'm not. It just fits with everything else I know about you. Which is what? Lucas had stepped closer, taking the ravioli cutter from her hand and setting it down. That you put everyone else first. That you're generous in ways that have nothing to do with money. That you're one of the most genuinely kind people I've ever met. Emma had flushed slightly, looking down. I'm not special, Lucas. I'm just doing what needs to be done. That's what makes you special. You don't see it as sacrifice. You see it as love. When she'd looked up at him, her eyes had been bright with something that looked like hope and fear mixed together. What are we doing, Lucas? What do you mean? This, us. She gestured vaguely. 10 dates over a month, meeting each other's families. I like you. A lot. But I need to know if you're actually interested in building something here, or if this is just, I don't know, casual. Lucas had known this conversation was coming, had dreaded it, because answering honestly meant admitting his feelings, which meant acknowledging that his experiment had failed, or succeeded, depending on how you looked at it. It's not casual, he'd said quietly. Emma, I haven't felt this way about anyone since before my marriage fell apart. He'd trailed off, searching for words that weren't lies, because everything else had been a lie. His clothes, his financial situation, his carefully constructed poverty. But what he felt for Emma was desperately, dangerously real. I'm falling in love with you, he'd admitted, and that terrifies me. Emma had stepped closer, her hands finding his. It terrifies me too, but I think maybe it's supposed to. And then she'd kissed him, and Lucas had felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling, because kissing Emma felt nothing like kissing Jessica had felt. There was no calculation in it, no transaction. just warmth and hope and the frightening possibility of actual intimacy. They'd broken apart when Tyler had called from the living room. Is dinner happening, or should I order the pizza? Emma had laughed, flustered, beautiful. Dinner's happening! 5 minutes! The ravioli had been imperfect but delicious, and they'd eaten together at the small table, Lucas, Emma, Tyler, and later Sophie when Lucas had picked her up from Jessica's place. 4 people who'd found each other through various forms of chance and intention, forming something that felt suspiciously like family. And Lucas had realized, with growing horror, that he'd built his life on Emma's kindness while lying to her about everything that mattered. But he'd still said nothing, still kept his secret, still told himself there would be a right time to confess. He'd had no idea that time was about to be chosen for him in the worst possible way. The following Saturday, Lucas arrived at Emma's apartment to find her in tears. She answered the door with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands, and Lucas's first thought was that somehow she'd discovered the truth about him, that his lies had been exposed, and this was the end he'd been both dreading and perhaps subconsciously engineering all along. Emma, what's wrong? He stepped inside, reaching for her, but she pulled away slightly, wrapping her arms around herself. It's Tyler. He had an appointment with his specialist yesterday. Her voice cracked. There's a surgery. It could help with his mobility, reduce his pain, but insurance won't cover it because they consider it elective, and we don't have... She stopped, pressing her palms against her eyes. We don't have $40,000. Lucas felt the world tilt slightly. $40,000. The amount Emma needed to help her brother was less than he spent on his car's annual maintenance, less than he dropped on a watch he never wore, an amount so small in his real world that it barely registered as significant. How much time do you have to decide? He asked carefully. The doctor wants to schedule it within the next 6 months, before Tyler's growth plates fully close. Emma moved to the couch, sitting heavily. I've been saving, but I only have about $8,000. I thought maybe I could get a loan, but with my income and credit, no bank will give me that much. I thought about asking David or some of my regulars at the diner, but... She broke off, looking embarrassed. Lucas sat beside her, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. He could write her a check right now, could solve this problem with a signature, could end her brother's pain and her financial stress with money that meant nothing to him, but doing so would expose everything, would reveal that he'd been lying for months, that he'd watched her struggle and stress and sacrifice while pretending to be just as financially limited, would prove that he'd been testing her, measuring her worth by standards she didn't even know existed. We'll figure something out, he said, the words inadequate and hollow. Maybe there are payment plans, or... I asked. They want at least half up front. Emma turned to look at him, her eyes desperate and exhausted. I work double shifts already. I pick up every extra hour I can, but even if I stop eating, stop paying rent, I can't save that much in 6 months. The math doesn't work. Tyler rolled into the living room, his expression carefully neutral. Emma, I told you. The surgery isn't necessary. I'm fine as I am. You're not fine. You're in pain. You told the doctor you can't sleep most nights. I can manage it. You shouldn't have to just manage. Emma's voice broke completely. You're 17, Tyler. You should be thinking about college and friends and normal teenage things, not chronic pain and limited mobility. Emma, I'm your sister. Taking care of you is my job. Taking care of each other is both our jobs. Tyler glanced at Lucas, something unreadable in his expression. And bankrupting yourself isn't taking care of anyone. Lucas watched them argue with rising guilt and fury at himself, at the situation he'd created, at the fact that he'd put Emma in a position where she couldn't ask him for help because he'd lied about being unable to provide it. Let me think about this, Lucas said finally. Maybe I know someone who could help. A friend who works in medical financing. Emma looked at him with such hope that Lucas felt physically ill. Really? You think they might be able to help? I can ask. No promises, but I'll make some calls. It was another lie added to the growing pile, but Lucas couldn't see another option. He needed time to figure out how to help Tyler without exposing his deception. Needed to find a way to solve this problem without destroying everything he'd built with Emma in the process. But as he left her apartment that afternoon, Tyler caught him at the door. Lucas, can I talk to you for a second? They moved to the hallway, and Tyler looked at him with eyes far older than 17. Emma doesn't ask for help, ever. She'd rather break herself than ask someone to carry any of her weight. I know. So if you can actually help, if you know someone or something, please. I know you guys haven't been dating that long, and I know $40,000 is impossible money for most people, but if there's anything you can do, Tyler's voice wavered slightly. She's already given up so much for me. I can't watch her give up more. Lucas felt something crack in his chest. I'll figure something out, Tyler. I promise. Thank you. Tyler extended his hand and Lucas shook it, feeling the weight of promises he had no idea how to keep without shattering everything. The answer came to him on the subway ride home, and it was as elegant as it was dishonest. He'd create a fictional benefactor. Someone who wanted to help anonymously, perhaps someone Lucas had met through his fake consulting work. Someone generous and wealthy who'd been moved by Tyler's story. It would require careful construction, believable details, another layer of lies. But it would solve the immediate problem without exposing Lucas's deception. Would let him help Tyler while maintaining his cover. He was already mentally drafting the story when his phone rang. Sophie's name on the screen. Hey, sweetheart, what's up? Daddy, can Emma come to dinner tonight? Mommy canceled again, and I'm sad, and Emma makes everything better. Lucas closed his eyes. Sophie, Emma might be busy. Please, I already texted her, and she said yes if you said yes. Of course she had, because Sophie had Emma's number now, had integrated Emma into her life with the wholehearted trust that children possessed before the world taught them caution. And Emma, being Emma, would drop everything to comfort a disappointed 7-year-old. Okay, tell Emma I'll pick her up at 6. Thank you, Daddy. I love you. I love you too, Sophie. But as Lucas hung up, he felt the walls closing in. Because every kindness Emma showed, every sacrifice she made, every moment she chose them despite having every reason to choose easier options, all of it made his lies heavier, more unforgivable. That evening, Emma arrived at Lucas's building, not his penthouse, but a modest apartment in a middle-income neighborhood that Lucas kept specifically for his experiment. He'd furnished it carefully with second-hand furniture and discount store finds, had stocked it with generic groceries and evidence of careful budgeting. It was his stage set, his elaborate fiction. Emma had brought cookies she'd baked. For Sophie, Tyler said chocolate chip usually helps when kids are sad. They'd made spaghetti together in the narrow kitchen, Emma moving comfortably in the space while Sophie sat at the counter and talked about her mother's latest broken promise. Emma listened with full attention, validated Sophie's feelings without bad-mouthing Jessica, and somehow made a 7-year-old understand that her mother's failures weren't Sophie's fault. Your mom is dealing with her own stuff, Emma said gently. Sometimes adults have problems they don't know how to fix, and those problems make them bad at showing up for people they love. But that's about her, not about you. But it still hurts. Of course it does. Love hurts when it's not given back the way we need. Emma squeezed Sophie's hand. But you have people who show up. Your dad shows up every single day. Tyler's excited to meet you again. I'm here right now, eating slightly burnt spaghetti with you. It's not burnt, Sophie protested, but she was smiling. It's a little burnt. Your dad got distracted. Emma glanced at Lucas, warmth in her eyes. But that's okay. Burnt food with people you love is better than perfect food alone. After dinner, they'd watched Sophie's favorite movie, and Sophie had fallen asleep between them on the couch. Emma had traced patterns on Sophie's hair absently, and Lucas had watched her, memorizing the moment, the softness of it, the rightness. She's lucky to have you, Emma said quietly. Not every dad would be this present, this consistent. I'm lucky to have her. She's the best thing I ever made. You didn't make her alone. No, but Jessica contributed genetics, not parenting. Lucas shifted slightly, careful not to wake Sophie. Everything good about Sophie happened despite her mother, not because of her. Emma was quiet for a moment. Do you still love her, Jessica? No, I don't think I have in years. Lucas met Emma's eyes. I think I love the idea of her, the life we were supposed to build. But the actual person? She showed me pretty clearly who she was, and it wasn't someone I could love. That must have been lonely, being married to someone you couldn't love. It was, but being divorced from her is better. At least now I'm not pretending. The irony of those words hit Lucas immediately, because he was pretending, not with Jessica, but with Emma. Pretending to be someone he wasn't, living a life that was entirely fictional, testing Emma against standards she had no idea existed. "Emma," he started, then stopped, because Sophie was sleeping between them, and this wasn't the time or place for confessions. "Thank you for being here. It means everything to Sophie, to me. There's nowhere else I'd rather be." She leaned her head against his shoulder, careful not to disturb Sophie. "Is that weird? We've only been seeing each other for a few weeks, but this feels more real than relationships I had for years." "It's not weird. I feel it too." They'd sat like that for another hour, Sophie sleeping peacefully, Emma warm against Lucas's side, the television playing something neither of them watched. And Lucas had thought, this is what I was looking for. This is what I needed to find. But he'd found it through lies, and that foundation was starting to crack. The next morning, Lucas had called Marcus from his real office, the one in the building he owned, where his assistant screened his calls and his calendar was managed by people paid to ensure his time was optimized. "I need your help," Lucas said without preamble. "With what?" "I need to get $40,000 to someone without them knowing it came from me." Marcus had been silent for a long moment. "Is this about the woman you've been seeing? The one you've been lying to?" "Her brother needs surgery. Insurance won't cover it. She doesn't have the money. So give it to her." "I can't. If I do, she'll know I've been lying about everything." "Luke," Marcus's voice had been careful, measured. "You understand that not helping is worse than exposing your lies, right? You're going to let a teenager suffer because you're afraid of being caught?" "I'm not." Lucas stopped, frustrated. "I'm trying to find a way to help without destroying what Emma and I have built." "What you've built is based on lies. It's already destroyed, Luke. You just haven't admitted it yet." "That's not helpful." "Truth rarely is," Marcus sighed. "Look, I can set up an anonymous donor thing through the company's charitable foundation. We do it for employees sometimes, but you need to understand this is just another lie, another layer of deception. Eventually it all comes out. And when it does, Emma's not going to care that you helped Tyler. She's going to care that you lied about being able to help in the first place." Lucas had known Marcus was right, but the image of Tyler's face, of his quiet acceptance that he'd have to live with pain because his sister couldn't afford otherwise, had been unbearable. "Set it up, please. You're making a mistake. Add it to the list." Marcus had arranged everything with his characteristic efficiency. Within 3 days, Emma had received a letter from the Morris Tate Foundation, informing her that an anonymous donor had covered the full cost of Tyler's surgery after hearing about his case through his doctor's office. All expenses paid, no strings attached, no repayment necessary. Emma had called Lucas crying. "I can't believe this is happening. Tyler's surgery is covered. Everything. The hospital, the physical therapy after, everything." "That's incredible, Emma. I'm so happy for you guys." "I don't even know who to thank. The letter said anonymous. Who does that? Who just gives away $40,000 to strangers?" "Someone who can afford to. Someone who wanted to help." Emma had been quiet for a moment. "Lucas, you couldn't have." "Emma, I wish I could have, but you know I don't have that kind of money." The lie had come easily, practiced. "I'm just glad someone was able to help." She'd believed him. Of course she'd believed him. Because Lucas had spent months establishing his financial limitations, making it impossible for Emma to imagine he had resources beyond his claimed consulting work and careful budgeting. Tyler's surgery had been scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the interim, Emma had floated through her days with visible relief, the constant stress that had tightened her shoulders finally easing. She'd picked up fewer shifts at the diner, spent more time with Tyler, started planning for after the surgery when his mobility would improve. Lucas had felt like a monster. He'd solved Emma's problem, yes, but he'd done it through more lies, more deception. Had used his wealth to manipulate a situation while maintaining the fiction of his poverty. Had played God with someone else's life while pretending to be powerless. "You're different lately," Sophie had observed one evening. They'd been playing cards, their usual Sunday routine, and Lucas had been distracted, his mind on Emma and Tyler and the increasingly complex web he'd woven. Different how? Sad. Even when you're smiling, you look sad. Lucas had put down his cards, pulling Sophie close. I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just thinking about grown-up stuff. Is it about Emma? Sort of. Sophie had been quiet, leaning against him. Do you love her, Daddy? The question had caught Lucas off guard. Why do you ask? Because you look at her the way you used to look at Mommy, before Mommy got mean. The observation had been painfully accurate. Lucas did love Emma, had perhaps loved her from the moment she'd paid for their first dinner without hesitation or judgment. But the love was complicated by the lies that surrounded it, by the knowledge that it was built on foundations that would crumble the moment Emma learned the truth. Yeah, Sophie, I think I do love her. Does she love you back? I think so. Then why do you look sad? Because love built on lies was inherently sad, Lucas had thought, because he'd created a situation where the best possible outcome still required Emma to forgive the unforgivable. Because he'd tested her like she was an experiment instead of a person, and she'd passed every test while he'd failed the only one that mattered, being honest. Sometimes love is complicated, he'd said finally. Grown-ups always say that. But Tyler says love is actually simple. You just show up and tell the truth and try not to be a jerk. Tyler's a smart kid. So why don't grown-ups listen to smart kids? It was a good question, one Lucas had no answer for. Tyler's surgery had gone well. Lucas and Emma had sat in the hospital waiting room for 6 hours, Emma's hand gripped in his, her breathing carefully controlled. Sophie had come after school, bringing homework and worry, sitting close to Emma in the way children did when they sensed adult distress. When the surgeon had finally emerged with good news, the procedure successful, Tyler's recovery outlook excellent, Emma had collapsed against Lucas, sobbing with relief. He's going to be okay. He's really going to be okay. Lucas had held her, feeling the weight of his deception like physical pressure, because Emma trusted him completely, leaned on him literally and metaphorically, believed he was someone he wasn't, loved him for qualities he'd fabricated. In Tyler's hospital room later, the teenager had been groggy but smiling. Hey Emma, hey Lucas, did I survive? You survived, you dramatic idiot. Emma had kissed his forehead, her hands gentle. How do you feel? Like someone rebuilt my leg with screwdrivers, but the doctor says it worked, says I'll be able to walk better once I heal. I'm so proud of you, Tyler. I didn't do anything. The mysterious benefactor did everything. I'm just the guy who gets to benefit from someone else's generosity. Tyler had looked at Lucas, something odd in his expression. Pretty incredible that someone we've never met cared that much, huh? Incredibly fortunate, Lucas had agreed, the words ashes in his mouth. Over the following weeks, as Tyler recovered and Emma balanced work with hospital visits and physical therapy appointments, Lucas had felt his carefully constructed world beginning to fracture. Emma had invited him to family dinners, had integrated him fully into her life. Tyler had started calling him for advice about college applications, had shared jokes and stories and small confidences. Sophie had started talking about Emma like she was permanent. When Emma moves in, can she have the office? Or should we make that Tyler's room? Sophie, Emma's not moving in. But why not? You love her. She loves you. We could all live together. Like a real family. We are a real family, you and me. But we could be bigger, better. Sophie had looked at him with those two knowing eyes. Don't you want that, Daddy? He'd wanted it desperately. That was the problem. Lucas had started his experiment to prove that love was transactional, that women only valued him for his money. He'd wanted to find someone who would love him despite having nothing material to offer. He'd found that person in Emma. She'd passed every test, proved every hypothesis wrong. She'd stayed through declined cards and cheap dates and modest apartments. She'd paid for dinners she couldn't afford, had shared her limited resources, had welcomed him into her struggling family without ever suggesting he should provide more than presence and care. Emma had loved him exactly as he'd claimed to want, for who he was rather than what he had. And in the process, Lucas had trapped himself in lies so deep he couldn't see a way out that didn't destroy everything. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening, 6 weeks after Tyler's surgery. Lucas and Emma had been walking through Central Park. Sophie and Tyler both occupied elsewhere. The autumn air was cool, leaves just beginning to turn, and Emma had been telling him about her plans, how Tyler's improved mobility meant he could consider colleges farther from home, how she might finally be able to pursue her food truck dream, how things were finally starting to feel possible instead of just survivable. "I keep thinking about the donor," Emma said, watching ducks on the pond. "Whoever gave us that money. I've tried to find out who it was, to thank them, but the foundation won't tell me anything, just that it was someone who wanted to remain anonymous. Maybe that's the point. Maybe they don't want thanks. But I want to give it. I want them to know what they made possible." Emma had turned to face Lucas, her eyes bright. "Tyler's walking better. He's in less pain. He's talking about going to MIT for computer science. None of that would be happening without that donor. They changed our entire lives." Lucas had felt the guilt like a physical weight. "I'm sure they know they helped. That's probably enough." "Maybe, but..." Emma had hesitated, then continued. "Lucas, I need to tell you something about money." His heart had stopped. "Okay. I've been thinking about us, about our future. And I need you to know that I don't care that you don't have money." She'd taken his hands, earnest. "I know you worry about it. I can see it sometimes, in how you apologize for cheap dates or split checks. But I need you to hear me. I don't care. Money's never been what matters to me." "Emma, let me finish. Please." She'd squeezed his hands. "My parents didn't have much. We were happy anyway. Tyler and I don't have much. We're happy anyway. What makes life good isn't the size of your bank account. It's the people you're with, the love you share. You've given me more in 2 months than some men give in years. You show up. You care. You're present with Sophie in ways that matter more than expensive toys or fancy vacations. That's what counts." Lucas had felt something breaking inside him, because Emma's speech, her beautiful, generous, painfully sincere speech, was exactly what he'd been testing for. The proof that she valued him beyond money. The validation his experiment had been designed to uncover. But hearing it now, knowing what he'd done to get it, Lucas felt only shame. "Emma, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He'd opened his mouth, the confession right there, ready to spill out and shatter everything. But before he could speak, Emma's phone had rung. She'd checked it, then gasped. "It's Tyler's doctor. I have to take this." Lucas had watched her walk a few steps away, heard her voice shift from worry to joy. When she'd returned, she'd been crying. "Tyler's blood work came back. The doctor says his recovery is even better than expected. He might regain almost full mobility. Lucas, he might not need his wheelchair at all except for long distances." She'd thrown her arms around him, and Lucas had held her while she sobbed with relief and happiness. And in that moment, with Emma shaking in his arms, grateful for a miracle that Lucas had purchased, he'd known he couldn't confess. Not today. Not when Emma was this happy, this hopeful. He'd tell her soon, he'd promised himself. Just not now. Not when things were finally going right for her. But as they'd left the park, Emma's hand in his, Lucas had caught his reflection in a store window. He'd been wearing his thrift store clothes, his carefully shabby shoes, his entire costume of constructed poverty. And behind that reflection, he'd seen the truth. He wasn't protecting Emma by delaying his confession. He was protecting himself. From her anger, from her hurt, from the consequences of his own choices. He was a coward, wrapped in lies, and time was running out to become anything else. The decision to tell Emma the truth came 3 days later, not from courage, but from necessity. Lucas had been at his real office, the corner suite with the view that cost more per month than most people's yearly salary, when his assistant had knocked urgently. "Mr. Reed, there's a situation. Your ex-wife is downstairs demanding to see you." Jessica hadn't visited his office in the 2 years since their divorce. The fact that she'd shown up now, unannounced, meant either desperation or malice. With Jessica, it was often both. She'd swept into his office like she still owned part of it, her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair, a stark contrast to the woman Lucas had been pretending to be for the past 3 months. "Lucas, we need to talk about Sophie's school tuition." "We've already discussed this. I'm covering it, same as always. I want her transferred to Brearley. It's a better school, better connections, but it's $60,000 a year." Lucas had kept his expression neutral, though internally he'd been calculating. $60,000 meant nothing to his finances, but Jessica's timing was suspicious. Why the sudden concern about Sophie's education? You haven't shown up to a single parent-teacher conference this year. Because I'm her mother and I want what's best for her. Jessica had examined her nails, casual. Also, I ran into someone interesting at lunch yesterday. Emma Cole? She mentioned she was dating you. Funny, she seems to think you're some kind of struggling consultant living in Queens. The blood had drained from Lucas's face. You talked to Emma? Sweet girl, very earnest. She was actually defending you to my friends, talking about how money doesn't matter and true character is what counts. Jessica's smile had been vicious. I didn't correct her misconceptions. Yet. But I'm wondering what it's worth to you for me to keep quiet about your little social experiment. This isn't about money, Jessica. Everything is about money, darling. You taught me that. She'd leaned forward, predatory. $60,000 for Brearley, and I'll forget I ever met your girlfriend. Otherwise, I might feel compelled to invite her to lunch, show her some pictures from our old life, maybe drive her past this building and mention who actually owns it. Lucas had felt rage building, white hot, and barely controlled. You're blackmailing me over our daughter's education? I'm simply pointing out that you have resources you're not utilizing, resources that could benefit Sophie and coincidentally protect your current romantic situation. Jessica had stood, smoothing her skirt. Think about it. I'll expect your answer by Friday. After she'd left, Lucas had sat at his desk for an hour, staring at the city below. The equation was simple. Pay Jessica's ransom and continue lying to Emma, or refuse and have his ex-wife expose everything out of spite. But there was a third option, the one he'd been avoiding for weeks. Tell Emma himself. Control the narrative, face the consequences, and stop living in a fiction of his own creation. Marcus had found him there at sunset. Heard Jessica paid a visit. Security told me it looked tense. She met Emma. She's threatening to tell her everything unless I pay for an expensive school transfer. Are you going to pay? I don't know. Lucas had turned from the window. If I pay, I'm letting Jessica control my life again. But if I don't, Emma finds out from someone who will make it sound as bad as possible. Or you could tell Emma yourself, before Jessica gets the chance. And say what, Marcus? Sorry I've been lying for 3 months, pretending to be poor while secretly being rich. Sorry I paid for your brother's surgery while letting you think some mysterious donor saved you. Sorry I tested you like you were a science experiment instead of a human being. Yeah, basically that. Marcus had sat across from him. Look, it's going to be bad no matter how she finds out. But at least if you tell her, it's honest. At least then you're choosing truth over convenience for once. Lucas had known Marcus was right. The question was whether he had the courage to actually do it. That evening, he'd called Emma. Can we talk tomorrow? Something important. Her voice had been immediately worried. Is everything okay? Is it Sophie? Sophie's fine. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago. There'd been a pause, and Lucas had heard the fear in her silence. Okay, where do you want to meet? Not the apartment. Somewhere public. Because Lucas had known instinctively that Emma would need escape routes, would need the option to leave without feeling trapped. They'd agreed on the coffee shop where they'd had their second date, and Lucas had hung up feeling like a man scheduling his own execution. He'd spent the night rehearsing what to say, how to explain, but every version sounded like exactly what it was. Justifications for the unjustifiable. He'd lied to someone who'd been nothing but honest, had tested someone who'd never given him reason to doubt, had hidden his wealth while Emma had struggled with poverty that $40,000 had barely dented. Sophie had sent something wrong at breakfast. Daddy, you look sick. I'm okay, sweetheart. Are you and Emma fighting? Not fighting, just we need to have a conversation. Lucas had set down his coffee, unable to drink it. Sophie, if Emma and I don't work out, you know that's not your fault, right? Sophie's eyes had gone wide with fear. What do you mean? Are you breaking up? I don't know. Maybe. I did something that hurt her, and I need to apologize. What did you do? I lied to her about something important. Sophie had been quiet, processing. Mrs. Chen says lying breaks trust. She says trust is like a cup. Once it's broken, you can glue it back together, but it'll never hold water the same way. Mrs. Chen is very wise. So fix it, Daddy. Tell Emma you're sorry and fix it. If only it were that simple, Lucas had thought. If only apologies could undo months of systematic deception. The coffee shop had been nearly empty when Lucas arrived early. He'd sat in the same booth they'd used before, watching the door, rehearsing phrases that all felt inadequate. When Emma had walked in, she'd been wearing her diner uniform. She must have come straight from a shift. She'd looked tired, worried, and so beautiful that Lucas's chest had ached. Hey. She'd slid into the booth across from him, her hands immediately reaching for his. You're scaring me. What's going on? Lucas had looked at their joined hands, Emma's rough from work and care, his soft from a lifetime of privilege he'd been hiding. Emma, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you react, okay? Okay. Her voice had been small, uncertain. 3 months ago, when we met, I wasn't honest with you about who I am, about my life. Lucas had forced himself to meet her eyes. My name is Lucas Reed. That part's true, but almost everything else I've told you has been a lie. Emma had started to pull her hands back, but Lucas had held on. Please, let me finish. What do you mean, a lie? I'm not a struggling consultant. I don't live in Queens. I don't have money problems. The words had come faster now, like a dam breaking. I own a commercial real estate company. I'm worth about $400 million. The apartment you've been to isn't real. It's just a place I keep for dates. My actual home is a penthouse in Manhattan. Emma had gone completely still, her face draining of color. What? After my divorce, I became convinced that women only wanted me for my money. So I started going on dates pretending to be broke, testing whether anyone would stay if they thought I had nothing. Lucas had felt bile rising in his throat. You were test number 54, and you passed. You stayed when my card declined. You paid for dinners. You never asked for more than I claimed to have. You were perfect. Perfect. Emma had repeated the word like it was foreign. I was perfect. Emma, I'm sorry. The surgery. She'd pulled her hands away then, pressing them against her stomach like she might be sick. Tyler's surgery. The anonymous donor. That was me. I couldn't stand watching you struggle when I could fix it so easily. You let me think. Emma's voice had cracked. I paid for our first date with money I'd saved for Tyler's medication. Did you know that? Lucas had felt something die inside him. No, Emma, I didn't. You watched me stress about money for months. You watched me pick up double shifts and skip meals and worry about Tyler's future. And the whole time you could have helped. You could have made one phone call, written one check, but you didn't because you were too busy testing me? I know how it sounds. Do you? Emma had stood abruptly, her chair scraping loud in the quiet shop. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I opened my home to you. I introduced you to Tyler. I fell in love with you thinking we were equals, thinking we understood each other's struggles. But the whole time you were, what? Taking notes? Checking boxes? Evaluating my performance? It wasn't like that. Emma, I fell in love with you. You don't get to say that. Her voice had been sharp, wounded. You don't get to talk about love when this entire relationship has been a lie. Love requires honesty, Lucas. Love requires seeing someone as a person, not a test subject. Other customers had been starting to stare, but Emma hadn't seemed to notice or care. Did you laugh about it? When I worried about splitting checks? When I suggested free activities? She'd stopped, a horrified realization crossing her face. Oh my God! Sophie! Does Sophie know? Have you been teaching your daughter that it's okay to lie to people to see if they're worth caring about? Sophie doesn't know. No one knows except my business partner. Your business partner? Emma had laughed, but it had sounded broken. So you had someone to share the joke with, someone to help you plan your experiments. Marcus told me to stop. He said I was going to hurt you. He was right. Yes, Lucas, he was right. Emma had grabbed her purse, her movements jerky with emotion. I need to go. I can't look at you right now. Emma, please. Let me explain. Explain what? That you're rich and I'm poor and you thought that was a fun dynamic to manipulate? That you tested my love like I was applying for a job? She'd backed toward the door, tears streaming down her face. I thought you were someone special, someone who understood that people are more than their bank accounts. But you're exactly like everyone else who has money. You think it gives you the right to treat people like objects. That's not fair. Fair? The word had come out as almost a shout. You want to talk about fair? I gave you everything, Lucas. My time, my trust, my heart. I brought you into Tyler's life when I never bring anyone into Tyler's life because he's been hurt enough. And you repaid that by lying every single day, by watching us struggle and doing just enough to seem sympathetic without actually being honest. Lucas had stood, desperate. I'm sorry. Emma, I'm so sorry. I know I can't fix this, but please, you're right. You can't fix this. Emma had opened the door, then paused. Do you know what the worst part is? I would have liked you anyway. Rich Lucas, poor Lucas, whatever. I liked who you were when we talked, when we laughed, when you played with Sophie and joked with Tyler. That person. I loved that person, but I don't know if that person even exists or if he was just another character you were playing. He exists. Emma, he's real. I don't believe you. I can't believe you. She'd wiped her eyes with her sleeve, trying to compose herself. Don't contact me. Don't call. Don't text. Don't show up at the diner. I need time to process this, and I need you to respect that. What about Tyler? He'll wonder, I'll tell Tyler the truth, that you're a rich man who was pretending to be poor for fun, that we were your entertainment. Emma's voice had gone cold, distant. He'll be disappointed. He thought you were genuine. But I guess we both learned an important lesson about trusting people who seemed too good to be true. And then she'd been gone, leaving Lucas standing in the coffee shop with everyone staring, his carefully constructed world in ruins around him. He'd driven home, to his real home, the penthouse he'd hidden from Emma, in a daze. The doorman had greeted him with professional courtesy, the elevator had been silent and smooth, and his apartment had been exactly as he'd left it. Beautiful, expensive, and utterly empty. Sophie had been with Jessica for the night, which meant Lucas had been alone with his thoughts and his guilt. He'd poured himself whiskey he didn't drink, had stared at the city lights he barely saw, had replayed the conversation over and over, each iteration making him feel worse. Marcus had called around 10. I heard from building security that you had a difficult conversation today. Jessica mentioned she saw Emma leaving visibly upset. You're getting reports from building security now? Jessica called me. She wanted to gloat. Said something about how your charity case girlfriend finally learned the truth. Lucas had closed his eyes. I told Emma everything. She left. It's over. I'm sorry, Luke. Are you? You warned me this would happen. Warning you doesn't mean I wanted you to be hurt. Marcus had been quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I don't know. Emma said not to contact her, that she needs time. Then give her time. What if time doesn't help? What if she never forgives me? Then you live with the consequences of your choices. Marcus's voice had been gentle but firm. Luke, I love you like a brother, but you need to hear this. You earned this pain. You designed a test that could only end badly because the foundation was dishonest. Emma didn't fail your test. You failed hers. She tested you by being genuine and trusting and open, and you responded by lying. The words had landed like physical blows. I know I did this. So now you do the only thing you can do, you be honest. With yourself, with Sophie, with anyone else who asks. You stop hiding behind experiments and tests and protective measures. You accept that love is always a risk, and sometimes risks don't pay off. After hanging up, Lucas had sat in his empty penthouse and finally let himself feel the full weight of what he'd done. He hadn't just lost Emma, he'd hurt her, had made her feel foolish and used, had taken her kindness and generosity and trust and repaid them with systematic deception. And Tyler, brilliant, funny Tyler who'd trusted Lucas with college advice and programming questions and genuine friendship. Lucas had betrayed him too, had hidden behind false camaraderie while secretly being the benefactor Tyler wanted to thank. The guilt had been overwhelming, crushing. But underneath it had been something else. Shame. Because Marcus was right. Emma had tested Lucas every day by being herself, by being honest and open and vulnerable. And Lucas had failed spectacularly by being none of those things in return. His phone had buzzed with a text. Not from Emma, he hadn't really expected one, but from Tyler. Emma told me, "I get why you did it, but that doesn't make it okay. She's devastated. Please leave us alone for a while." Lucas had stared at the message, at Tyler's measured disappointment that somehow hurt worse than Emma's anger. Because Tyler understood. Tyler had grown up watching people treat his disability like a tragedy or an inspiration, had spent years being tested by others' expectations. Tyler knew what it felt like to be seen as something other than human. And Lucas had done that to Emma, had seen her as a test, a hypothesis to prove or disprove, rather than a person deserving of basic honesty. The next morning, Sophie had returned home chattering about her night at her mother's, but she'd stopped mid-sentence when she saw Lucas's face. "Daddy? What happened?" He'd sat her down, and in simple terms, he'd explained what he'd done. How he'd lied to Emma about having money because he was scared of being hurt again. How Emma had found out and been very upset. How they might not be together anymore. Sophie had listened with her characteristic seriousness, and when he'd finished, her eyes had been full of tears. "Daddy, that was mean." "I know, sweetheart. Emma was nice to us. She was nice to me. And you lied to her." "Yes, I did. Mrs. Chen says that when you hurt someone, you have to apologize and try to do better." "Are you going to do better?" Lucas had pulled Sophie into his lap, holding her tight. "I'm going to try. But sometimes, when you hurt someone really badly, sorry isn't enough. Sometimes they don't want to forgive you." "Emma's not like Mommy. Emma's nice." "Emma's very nice. But even nice people have limits. I broke her trust, Sophie. That's very hard to fix." Sophie had been quiet against his chest. "I'm going to miss her, and Tyler. I liked having them around." "I know. I'm going to miss them too. This is like when Mommy left, except this time it's your fault." The observation had been devastating in its accuracy. "Yes, this time it's my fault." The following days had been a special kind of torture. Lucas had thrown himself into work, but even that had felt hollow. He'd catch himself reaching for his phone to text Emma about something funny Sophie said, or to ask if Tyler wanted help with a college essay. Then he'd remember that he'd destroyed that relationship, had forfeited his right to those casual intimacies. Sophie had been subdued, grieving the loss of Emma and Tyler in her life. Lucas had offered to take her anywhere she wanted, do anything she wanted, but she'd just shaken her head. "I don't want things, Daddy. I wanted Emma." Jessica had called 3 days after the confrontation, smug satisfaction dripping from her voice. "I heard your little romance imploded. Such a shame. I suppose this means you'll be more amenable to discussing Brearley." "No, Jessica. Pay for it yourself if you want Sophie transferred." "Excuse me? You heard me. I'm done letting you manipulate me with money. Sophie's current school is excellent. If you want her somewhere else, you can cover the difference." "Lucas, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I'm teaching our daughter that money doesn't give you the right to control other people's lives. Maybe you should learn that lesson too." He'd hung up before she could respond, feeling a small flicker of something that might have been pride. It was a tiny step toward being honest, toward facing consequences without trying to buy his way out of them. A week after the confrontation, Lucas had received a letter. Not email, not text. An actual handwritten letter delivered to his office. Emma's handwriting had been neat, careful, and seeing it had made Lucas's chest ache with longing and regret. He'd opened it with shaking hands. "Lucas, I'm writing because I need to say things I couldn't say when I was angry. I need you to understand why this hurt so much. When my parents died, I learned that the world divides people into categories, those who help and those who judge. Most people who found out about my situation with Tyler did both, but the judgment always outweighed the help. They'd offer sympathy while looking at me like I was either a saint or a fool for giving up my plans. You seemed different. You never looked at me with pity. You never treated me like my circumstances defined me. You saw me as just Emma, a person trying her best, making choices that made sense to her. That's what I fell in love with. Not your money or your status, but the way you saw me clearly. Except you didn't see me clearly. You were looking through the lens of your test, your experiment, your need for proof that someone could love you without money. And I understand why you needed that proof. Divorce is traumatic. Jessica hurt you badly, and you were protecting yourself. But you protected yourself by hurting me, by making me feel foolish for every time I paid for our dates with tip money I could barely afford, by letting me stress about Tyler's surgery when you could have helped immediately, by accepting my love and trust while offering lies in return. I keep thinking about all our conversations, all the times I was honest about my fears, my struggles, my dreams, all the times you nodded and sympathized while hiding the fact that your reality was completely different from what you claimed. Did any of it feel real to you? Or was I always just a hypothesis you were testing? Tyler says I should forgive you because you did help him, even if you did it secretly. He says your intentions were good even if your methods were terrible. Tyler is kinder than I am. I'm not ready to forgive you yet. Maybe I won't ever be. Right now I'm angry and hurt, and I feel like an idiot for not seeing through your lies. I keep replaying moments trying to find the tells I missed, the clues that should have given you away. But you were thorough, Lucas. Your costume was convincing. Sophie called me yesterday. She wanted to apologize for your behavior, which broke my heart because she's 7, and this isn't her responsibility. I told her none of this was her fault. I told her you love her very much, and sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt people they care about. I hope that was okay. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if we can ever be friends, much less anything more. Right now I need space to figure out who I am without you in my life, without the version of you I thought I knew. What I do know is this: I would have loved you anyway. Rich, poor, struggling, successful. I didn't fall in love with your financial situation. I fell in love with your laugh, your dedication to Sophie, your willingness to listen to Tyler's long explanations about code. I fell in love with moments that money couldn't buy. If you'd been honest from the start, if you'd said, I have money, but I want to get to know you without that complicating things, I would have understood. I would have appreciated your caution, but you chose deception instead of trust, and that's what I can't forgive easily. Take care of Sophie. She deserves a father who models honesty and courage, not fear and manipulation. Emma Lucas had read the letter 3 times, each pass making him feel smaller and more ashamed, because Emma was right about everything. She'd been honest while he'd been strategic. She'd been vulnerable while he'd been calculating. She'd offered love while he'd offered tests. And now, sitting in his expensive office surrounded by evidence of his success, Lucas finally understood what he'd lost. Not just Emma, but the possibility of being the person she'd believed he was. Someone genuine, someone worthy of trust, someone capable of loving without needing guarantees first. He'd set out to prove that love was transactional, and he'd ended up proving only that he was too afraid to accept it when it was freely given. Lucas kept Emma's letter in his desk drawer and read it every morning for 2 weeks, each word a reminder of the person he'd failed to be. He didn't contact her, didn't show up at the diner, didn't try to force forgiveness she clearly wasn't ready to give. It was the least he could do, respect the one boundary she'd asked him to honor. But staying away from Emma didn't mean he could escape the consequences of his choices. They followed him everywhere, sharp and unrelenting. Sophie had grown quieter, spending long hours in her room with Mr. Flopsworth, and when Lucas asked if she wanted to talk, she'd simply shaken her head. I just miss them, Daddy. That's all. The guilt was suffocating. Lucas had damaged his daughter's ability to trust relationships, had taught her that people you loved could disappear suddenly, that foundations you thought were solid could crumble without warning. First Jessica, now Emma and Tyler. Sophie was learning all the wrong lessons about love and permanence. Marcus had stopped by the penthouse one evening, finding Lucas on the balcony staring at nothing. You look terrible. Thanks for the observation. I'm serious, Luke. You've lost weight. You're not sleeping. Your assistant says you're forgetting meetings. Marcus had settled into the chair beside him. This isn't healthy. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I'm supposed to feel terrible. Feeling terrible and destroying yourself aren't the same thing. Marcus had been quiet for a moment. Have you thought about what you're going to do? Long term, I mean. What is there to do? Emma wants space. I'm giving her space. And then what? You wait forever, hoping she forgives you? You move on? You actually deal with why you did this in the first place? Lucas had turned to look at his friend. Why I did what? The testing, the lies, the elaborate performance. Marcus had leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Luke, you've been seeing a therapist since the divorce. Have you talked to her about any of this? The answer was no. Lucas had canceled his last 3 sessions, unable to face Dr. Morrison's knowing questions and careful observations, unable to admit out loud what he'd done. You should go, Marcus had said gently. Not for Emma. She needs to heal on her own terms. But for yourself. And for Sophie. Because whatever drove you to test Emma's love is the same thing that's going to poison every relationship you have until you actually deal with it. After Marcus left, Lucas had sat with that observation for a long time. The truth was, he knew exactly what had driven his experiment. Fear. Fear of being valued only for his money, fear of trusting someone who might betray him, fear of being vulnerable enough to get hurt again. Jessica had taught him that love was conditional and transactional, and he designed his entire dating strategy to protect himself from learning that lesson twice. But in protecting himself, he'd become exactly what he'd accused others of being, someone who saw relationships as transactions, who measured worth by arbitrary standards, who withheld honesty as a test of someone else's character. The realization sat heavy in his chest. He'd become what he hated. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Lucas finally returned to therapy. Dr. Morrison had been her usual calm, observant self as Lucas explained what he'd done, what he'd lost, and why he'd been avoiding her office. So you conducted a systematic experiment to prove that women only valued you for your wealth, she'd summarized when he'd finished. And when you found someone who proved your hypothesis wrong, you were unable to accept the results without destroying the relationship. Does that sound accurate? When you put it like that, it sounds insane. Not insane. Self-protective taken to an extreme. Dr. Morrison had made a note. Lucas, we've talked before about how your divorce reinforced childhood wounds around conditional love. Your mother's affection was tied to achievement. Your father's presence was tied to his work schedule. Jessica simply continued that pattern in adult form. I know that. We've discussed it. Knowing intellectually and healing emotionally are different processes. She'd set down her pen, giving him her full attention. You've been operating from a belief system that says love must be earned, proven, tested, that it can't be trusted when it's freely given because there must be hidden conditions. Emma's unconditional acceptance threatened that entire worldview. Lucas had felt something crack open in his chest, so I sabotaged it. You created conditions that made unconditional love impossible to sustain. You can't build intimacy on lies, Lucas. The relationship was always going to collapse because you designed it to fail from the beginning. Then what was the point? Why did I even bother? Because part of you wanted to be wrong. Part of you wanted to find someone who could love you without conditions, who could see past the money to the person underneath. You found that person in Emma, but you weren't ready to receive that kind of love, so you made sure it couldn't last. The observation had hit with devastating accuracy. Lucas had spent months testing Emma, and when she'd passed every test, he'd still kept lying because accepting her love meant accepting vulnerability, meant risking the kind of pain Jessica had inflicted, meant trusting again after trust had broken him. How do I fix this? He'd asked, knowing even as he said it that the question was wrong. You don't fix it. You can't fix other people, Lucas. You can only fix yourself, Doctor. Morrison had leaned back in her chair. Emma has to decide whether she can forgive you, and that's not your choice to make. What you can choose is whether you're going to learn from this, whether you're going to address the fear and trauma that drove these behaviors, whether you're going to become someone capable of accepting love when it's offered. And if Emma never forgives me, then you live with that consequence and do better next time. With the next person, with Sophie, with yourself. You can't undo the past, but you can change the pattern going forward. Lucas had left that session feeling raw but slightly less hopeless. He couldn't fix what he'd broken with Emma, but maybe he could fix what was broken in himself. Maybe that was the real work he needed to do. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source 2 days later. Sophie had asked to visit Tyler, and before Lucas could explain why that wasn't possible, she'd already picked up the phone. Tyler, it's Sophie. Can I come visit? I miss you. Lucas had frozen, unsure whether to take the phone or let it play out. He'd chosen the latter, listening as Sophie made plans with Tyler like nothing had changed, like relationships were simple things that didn't break just because adults complicated them. When she'd hung up, she'd looked at Lucas with determined eyes. Tyler says I can come over Saturday. He says Emma will be at work, so she won't be uncomfortable. You have to take me. Sophie, I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Tyler's my friend. You said friends show up for each other. She'd crossed her arms, stubborn. You also said that when you hurt someone, you have to try to do better. So do better, Daddy. Take me to see Tyler. Lucas had realized in that moment that his 7-year-old daughter understood relationships better than he did. She didn't see Tyler as collateral damage in Lucas's failed romance. She saw him as a friend worth keeping, worth fighting for, regardless of the complications. So on Saturday morning, Lucas had driven Sophie to the Queen's apartment he'd visited so many times, his stomach churning with anxiety and shame. Tyler had answered the door, and his expression had been guarded, but not hostile. Hey, Lucas. Sophie. He'd backed his wheelchair up to let them enter. Emma's at the diner until 6. I figured that would be easier. Sophie had immediately launched into stories about school and a new book she was reading, and Tyler had engaged with her with his characteristic patience and wit. Lucas had stood awkwardly in the living room, surrounded by memories of dinners and laughter and belonging that he'd destroyed. After 30 minutes, Tyler had sent Sophie to his room to see the new game he'd been coding. When she was out of earshot, he'd turned to Lucas with serious eyes that looked far older than 17. I need to say something, and I need you to just listen, okay? Okay? What you did was messed up, really messed up. Emma's been crying herself to sleep, picking up extra shifts to avoid thinking about you, and generally acting like her heart's been put through a shredder. Tyler's voice had been calm but firm. I wanted to hate you for that. I wanted to tell Sophie you couldn't come, to protect Emma from any chance of seeing you. But I can't do that because it's not fair to Sophie, and because hating you doesn't actually help my sister. Lucas had swallowed hard. Tyler, I'm sorry. I said listen. Tyler had held up a hand. Here's what I know. You lied about money, and that's wrong. You tested Emma like she was some kind of experiment, and that's degrading and cruel. You watched us struggle when you could have helped, and that's borderline sadistic. All of that is true, and all of that hurt my sister badly. I know. But, Tyler had continued, I also know that you're the one who paid for my surgery. Emma doesn't think I know, but I'm not stupid. The timing was too perfect, the foundation too convenient. You did that secretly because if you'd done it openly, it would have blown your cover, which means you chose to help me even when it complicated your lie. That counts for something. Lucas had felt tears burning behind his eyes. It doesn't excuse what I did. No, it doesn't, but it means you're not completely terrible, just catastrophically bad at relationships. Tyler had maneuvered his wheelchair closer. Lucas, I'm not going to tell you what to do about Emma. That's between you two, and honestly, I don't know if she'll ever forgive you. But I will tell you this. If you really love her, if this wasn't just some extended psychological experiment, then you need to prove it. Not with money, not with grand gestures, but with actual change, with becoming someone worthy of the love she was offering. How do I do that? I don't know. Therapy? Self-reflection? Actually dealing with whatever made you think testing people was acceptable? Tyler had shrugged. But whatever you do, do it for yourself first. Because Emma deserves someone who's healed, not someone who's still broken and trying to use her as glue. The wisdom of the statement had hit Lucas hard. Tyler was right. He couldn't ask Emma to love him while he was still the person who'd hurt her. He had to become someone different, someone better. Not to win Emma back, but because that's who he should have been all along. Sophie had emerged from Tyler's room full of excitement about the game, and they'd spent another hour at the apartment, the three of them falling into easy conversation. When it was time to leave, Sophie had hugged Tyler tight. Can I come back next Saturday? If your dad's okay with it, sure. Sophie had looked at Lucas, hopeful. Can I, Daddy? If Tyler and Emma are comfortable with it, yes. On the drive home, Sophie had been uncharacteristically quiet until she'd suddenly said, Tyler told me you paid for his surgery. He said it was supposed to be a secret, but secrets like that are okay because they help people. Lucas had nearly swerved into another lane. He told you that? He said you did it because you care about him and Emma, even though you made mistakes. He said, that's what makes things complicated. People can care about each other and still hurt each other. Sophie had looked out the window. I think he's right. You hurt Emma, but you also helped Tyler. Both things are true. Both things are true, Lucas had echoed, the simple complexity of it settling in his bones. The following week, Lucas had done something he'd never done in his entire adult life. He'd taken a step back from his company. He'd promoted Marcus to acting CEO, had delegated his most pressing responsibilities, and had cleared his schedule for the next 3 months. What are you doing? Marcus had asked when Lucas had explained the plan. I'm doing the work I should have done after the divorce. I'm going to therapy 3 times a week. I'm going to actually be present with Sophie instead of using work as an escape. I'm going to figure out who I am without money as a shield or a weapon. And Emma? I'm leaving Emma alone unless she decides she wants to talk. This isn't about winning her back, Marcus. This is about not being the kind of person who would manipulate and test someone in the first place. Marcus had studied him for a long moment. I'm proud of you, Luke. This is the hardest thing you've ever done, and you're choosing to do it anyway. I destroyed something beautiful because I was too afraid to believe it was real. If that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is. The next months had been the most difficult of Lucas's life. Therapy with Dr. Morrison had stripped away layers of defense mechanisms and forced him to confront truths he'd been avoiding for years. His mother's emotional unavailability. His father's priority on success over presence. Jessica's reinforcement of the belief that love was something you earned through achievement and wealth rather than something you received simply by being yourself. You've been performing your entire life, Dr. Morrison had observed during one session. Performing success for your parents, performing the role of perfect husband for Jessica, performing poverty for Emma. When have you ever just been yourself without trying to prove something? Lucas had realized he didn't know the answer. He didn't know who he was when he wasn't trying to meet someone else's expectations or test someone else's motives. So he'd started exploring. He'd taken Sophie to museums and parks and activities he'd always been too busy for. He'd volunteered at a youth center in Sophie's neighborhood, working with kids from single-parent homes. He'd started playing piano again, not for performance, but for the simple joy of making music. He'd also started being honest. Radically, uncomfortably honest. When Sophie asked if he missed Emma, instead of deflecting or protecting her, he'd said, "Yes, sweetheart, every day. I made terrible choices, and now I'm living with the consequences. That's hard, but it's also right. Action should have consequences." When Jessica had tried to manipulate him again, this time using Sophie's birthday party as leverage, Lucas had been direct. "No, Jessica, I won't pay for an elaborate party to impress your friends. Sophie wants a small gathering in the park with her actual friends, and that's what we're doing. If you want to attend and be part of our daughter's life, you're welcome. But I'm done letting you use money to control situations." Jessica had been shocked into silence, and Lucas had realized that honesty was its own form of power. Not manipulative power, but the simple strength of saying what was true and accepting whatever came next. Sophie's birthday had come 6 weeks after the confrontation with Emma. Lucas had organized the park party Sophie wanted. Simple, genuine, focused on what his daughter actually enjoyed rather than what looked impressive. Marcus and his family had come, along with several of Sophie's school friends and their parents. Tyler had texted the day before. "Sophie invited us. Emma's not ready to see you, but I'd like to come if that's okay. I can leave if it's too weird." Lucas had responded immediately. "Please come, Sophie would love that. Love. I'll stay out of your way if you need space. I don't need you to stay away. I need you to be normal. Can you do that?" "I can try." Tyler had arrived at the party in his wheelchair, which he now used less frequently thanks to the surgery, but still relied on for long outings. Sophie had screamed with delight and thrown herself at him in a hug that had nearly toppled him. "Easy, Sophie, I'm still breakable." But Tyler had been laughing, genuine joy on his face. Lucas had watched from a distance as Tyler integrated easily with the other guests, charming Sophie's friends with magic tricks he'd learned, and making the adults laugh with his quick wit. At one point, Marcus had approached Tyler, and Lucas had seen them talking seriously, Marcus nodding at something Tyler said. Later, Marcus had pulled Lucas aside. "The kid is special, brilliant and kind. Rare combination." "I know. He asked me if you were doing okay, said he worries about you." Marcus had clapped Lucas on the shoulder. "You know you've really messed up when the person you wronged is worried about your well-being. Tyler's better than I deserve." Maybe, but he seems to think you're trying to be better. That counts for something. As the party was winding down, Tyler had rolled over to Lucas. Can we talk for a minute? They'd moved to a quieter section of the park, and Tyler had looked at Lucas with those old soul eyes. Emma knows I'm here. She asked me to tell you something. Lucas's heart had jumped. What? She said she sees you're trying. She's heard from Sophie about the changes you're making, the therapy, the stepping back from work, the honesty with Jessica. She wanted you to know she notices. Tyler had paused. She also said she's not ready to talk yet, but she's glad you're doing the work for yourself rather than as a performance to win her back. I am doing it for myself. I need to be better for Sophie and for whoever else might be in my life someday, even if that's never Emma. She also wanted me to tell you that she's doing her own work. She's in therapy too, dealing with some stuff about her parents' death and how she's used taking care of me as a way to avoid dealing with her own needs. Tyler had smiled slightly. Apparently we're all a mess in different ways. Being a mess seems to be a requirement for being human. Yeah, but at least you're trying to be a better mess. Tyler had glanced back at the party where Sophie was opening presents with her friends. Sophie's happy today, really happy. That's because of you doing things right. Keep doing that. After Tyler left, Lucas had stood in the park watching his daughter laugh with her friends, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her. It wasn't the elaborate party Jessica had wanted, with ponies and hired entertainers and expensive favors. It was smaller, simpler, and infinitely more real. She's having a great time, Marcus had observed, joining him. You did good, Luke. I just listened to what she actually wanted. That's doing good. Listening, being present, following through. Marcus had been quiet for a moment. 6 months ago, you were conducting experiments on women and lying to everyone around you. Now you're in therapy, being honest, and actually parenting your daughter instead of buying her affection. That's real progress. It doesn't feel like enough. Progress never does, but it's still progress. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed exhausted and happy, Lucas had sat on her floor watching her sleep. She'd been clutching Mr. Flopsworth with one hand, and in her other hand was a friendship bracelet Tyler had given her at the party, purple and silver, her favorite colors. I'm trying, sweetheart, Lucas had whispered. I'm trying to be the dad you deserve, the person everyone deserves. His phone had buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a wild moment, Lucas had thought it might be Emma, but when he'd opened it, the message had been from Tyler. Emma wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to meet, not to get back together, just to talk. She has things she needs to say, and she'd rather say them in person than in another letter. No pressure if you're not ready. Let me know. Lucas had stared at the message for a long time, his heart pounding. He'd wanted to respond immediately, to say yes before Emma could change her mind, but he'd forced himself to think carefully, to consider whether he was actually ready to face her. The truth was, he was terrified. Terrified of seeing the hurt in her eyes, terrified of hearing exactly how much damage he'd caused, terrified that this conversation would be the final closing of a door he desperately wanted to walk back through. But he'd also known that Emma deserved this, deserved to say whatever she needed to say, deserved to be heard and witnessed in her pain. And if Lucas was truly trying to be better, that meant facing consequences even when they were frightening. He texted back, I'm ready when she is, just tell me when and where. Tyler's response had been almost immediate. Saturday, 2 p.m., the coffee shop where you first confessed. She said it feels right to close the circle there. Lucas had spent the next 4 days preparing himself emotionally, working with Dr. Morrison on staying present and open rather than defensive. Emma needs to express her feelings, Dr. Morrison had reminded him. Your job isn't to defend yourself or minimize the damage. Your job is to listen and accept responsibility without trying to fix or explain it away. What if she never wants to see me again? What if this is just closure before she moves on completely? Then you accept that with grace. You don't get to control how Emma heals, Lucas. You gave up that right when you chose deception over honesty. Saturday had arrived with agonizing slowness, and Lucas had dressed carefully, not in his thrift store costume, but not in his expensive CEO wardrobe either. Just normal clothes, honest clothes. He'd arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, his hands shaking, his heart racing. Emma had walked in exactly at 2, and the sight of her had stolen Lucas's breath. She'd looked thinner, tired, but also somehow stronger than he remembered. She'd been carrying herself differently, shoulders back, chin up, like someone who'd walked through fire and emerged with new understanding of her own resilience. She'd sat across from him without smiling, and for a long moment they just looked at each other, all the words Lucas had practiced evaporating in the face of her actual presence. "Thank you for coming," Emma had said finally, her voice steady. "Thank you for being willing to talk to me. I have some things I need to say. Tyler said you're doing therapy, working on yourself. That's good, but I need you to hear this anyway because I need to say it for me, not for you." Lucas had nodded, throat tight. "I'm listening." And then Emma had begun to speak, and Lucas had heard exactly what his lies had cost. Not just their relationship, but Emma's trust in her own judgment, her ability to believe in her instincts about people, her willingness to be vulnerable. Every word had landed like a hammer blow, and Lucas had absorbed each one, knowing he'd earned every ounce of her pain. Emma's hands were wrapped around her coffee cup, but she hadn't taken a single sip. Lucas watched her gathering courage, watched the way her jaw tightened and released, the way her eyes focused on some middle distance between them. "I've been angry for 3 months," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "Angry at you for lying, angry at myself for not seeing it, angry at the whole situation. But underneath the anger, there's something worse. There's this feeling that I can't trust my own judgment anymore." Lucas opened his mouth, but Emma held up her hand. "Please, let me finish." She took a breath. "When my parents died, I had to make impossible decisions. Take custody of Tyler or let him go into the system. Drop out of my plans or put my brother in a situation where he'd have less support. Every day for 4 years, I've made choices based on what felt right, on reading situations and people and trusting my instincts. And it worked. Tyler's thriving. We're okay. I learned to trust myself." She finally met his eyes, and Lucas saw the depth of hurt there. "Then you came along, and I trusted those same instincts. You felt genuine. When you talked about Sophie, when you listened to Tyler, when you held my hand, it all felt real. So I trusted you. I let you into the most protected parts of my life. And it turns out I was completely wrong. Everything I thought I knew about you was fiction." "Emma, I'm not done." Her voice cracked slightly. "Do you understand what that does to someone? To realize that you're so bad at reading people that you couldn't tell when someone was lying every single day for months? I keep replaying every conversation, every moment, trying to find where I should have known. The fact that I never did makes me feel stupid and blind," and she stopped, pressing her palm against her eyes. Lucas reached across the table instinctively, then pulled his hand back, unsure if touch would be welcome. "You're not stupid," he said quietly. "Emma, you're one of the smartest, most observant people I've ever met. I'm very good at lying. I had props and stories and a whole life constructed specifically to be believable. You didn't fail to see through it. I succeeded at deception." Emma lowered her hand, looking at him with red-rimmed eyes. "That doesn't make it better, Lucas. That makes it worse. You succeeded at deceiving someone who trusted you. Do you understand how much effort that takes? How calculated that is?" "I do. Now. I didn't let myself think about it that way when I was doing it." "What did you think about it as?" Lucas swallowed hard. "Self-protection, research, proof that I wasn't being naive again. I told myself I was just being careful, that anyone in my position would do the same thing after what Jessica did to me. And now? Now I know I was using my trauma as permission to traumatize someone else. I was so focused on not getting hurt that I didn't care who I hurt in the process." Lucas forced himself to maintain eye contact, even though everything in him wanted to look away from the pain in Emma's expression. "There's no justification for what I did. Not Jessica, not my childhood, not my fear. I chose to lie to you every single day, and that choice was cruel." Emma was quiet for a long moment, studying him. "Tyler thinks you've changed. He says the person you were 3 months ago wouldn't have said what you just said." "Tyler's been more generous to me than I deserve." "He has. We both have." Emma finally took a sip of her coffee, and Lucas noticed her hand was shaking slightly. "I need to know something, and I need you to be completely honest. Was any of it real? The conversations, the laughter, the way you were with Sophie, was any of that actually you, or was it all just part of the performance? The question hit Lucas like a physical blow because it was the one he'd been asking himself in therapy for months. Dr. Morrison had helped him understand that the person Emma had known wasn't entirely fake. It was a version of himself that existed when he felt safe enough to be vulnerable, when he wasn't performing success or protecting his wealth. It was real, Lucas said carefully. Not the circumstances, not the financial situation, but the feelings were real. The person I was with you and Tyler and Sophie, that's who I am when I'm not hiding behind money or status or fear. That's the version of myself I'm trying to become all the time now, not just in controlled situations where I'm testing someone. How am I supposed to believe that? How am I supposed to trust anything you say when you lied so thoroughly before? You're not. You shouldn't. Lucas leaned forward, desperate for her to understand. Emma, I don't expect you to trust me. I don't expect forgiveness or another chance or anything from you. I just need you to know that I'm doing the work to be better, not because I think it'll win you back, but because I can't live with being the person who did that to you. Emma's expression softened slightly, though the hurt remained. Tyler told me about the therapy, about you stepping back from work, about how you handled Jessica trying to manipulate you at Sophie's birthday party. Tyler talks to you about me? We live together, Lucas, and he cares about you even though he's angry about what you did. He's worried you're punishing yourself too much. Emma's lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. I told him that's not my problem anymore, but he says it should be because you're his friend and I'm his sister, and he doesn't want to lose either of us. I never wanted Tyler to be in the middle of this. Then you should have thought about that before you lied to both of us. The words were sharp, but not cruel. Just honest. Lucas, here's what I need you to understand. The lying hurt me. But what hurt more was realizing that you saw me as a test instead of a person. That while I was falling in love with you, you were checking boxes and taking notes and evaluating my performance. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. Emma's voice rose slightly. You said it yourself. 54 dates. I was number 54. Do you have any idea how dehumanizing that feels? To know that I was just data in your experiment about whether women are gold diggers? Lucas felt shame burn through him, hot and consuming. You're right. That's exactly what I did, and it was dehumanizing and wrong. Emma, I'm not trying to defend it. I'm trying to explain that somewhere in the middle of the experiment, it stopped being about testing you and started being about actually loving you. And that terrified me, so I kept lying because admitting the truth meant risking rejection, and I couldn't handle that after Jessica. So you made me handle rejection instead. You made me feel like an idiot for trusting you. Yes, I did, and I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover what I owe you. Emma looked down at her coffee, her shoulders tight. I'm in therapy too now. My therapist says I have attachment issues from my parents' death, that I'm afraid of abandonment, so I tend to give everything to relationships as insurance against being left. She says that's why I paid for our dates even when I couldn't afford it, why I brought you into Tyler's life so quickly, why I fell so hard so fast. Lucas felt his chest constrict. Emma, she says you exploited that. Maybe not consciously, but you took my fear of abandonment and used it to test my loyalty. Every time you made me choose between walking away or staying despite your apparent poverty, you were activating my deepest fear and measuring how I responded. The observation was devastating in its accuracy. Lucas hadn't thought about it that way. But Emma's therapist was right. He'd found someone whose wounds made her likely to stay through difficulty, and he'd exploited that tendency while calling it love. I'm so sorry, Lucas whispered. Emma, I'm so incredibly sorry. I know you are. Tyler says you've been miserable. Sophie told me you cry sometimes when you think she's asleep. Emma finally looked up, and there were tears on her cheeks. Part of me is glad you're hurting because you should hurt for what you did, but part of me hates that I still care enough for your pain to matter. You don't have to care. You don't owe me anything. I know I don't, but I do anyway, and that's what makes this so hard. Emma wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I came here to tell you that I can't forgive you, that what you did was unforgivable, and we can never be together again. I practiced that speech for days. Lucas felt his heart drop, even though he'd known this was coming. Okay. But then I got here and I saw you, and I remembered why I fell in love with you in the first place. The way you listen, the way you care about Sophie, the way you made Tyler laugh. Emma's voice broke. And I realized that being unforgiving doesn't make the hurt go away. It just makes me hard and bitter, and I don't want to be that person. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know what I'm saying. Emma laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. I'm angry and hurt, and I don't trust you, but I also miss you. I miss us. I miss the relationship I thought we had, even though I know it was built on lies. Lucas didn't dare move, didn't dare hope. Emma, if there's any part of you that thinks we could try again, there is. That's the problem. She looked at him with such vulnerability that Lucas felt his own eyes burn. There's a part of me that wants to give you another chance, that wants to believe people can change, that we could build something real this time. But there's also a part of me that's terrified you'll hurt me again, that I'm being stupid to even consider forgiving you. You're not stupid. Emma, you're not. Then what am I? What do you call someone who goes back to someone who lied to them for months? Human. You call them human. Lucas reached across the table slowly, giving Emma time to pull away. When she didn't, he gently covered her hand with his. Emma, I can't promise I'll never hurt you again. People in relationships hurt each other sometimes, even when they don't mean to. But I can promise that I'll never lie to you again, that I'll never test you or manipulate situations or hide who I really am. If you give me another chance, it'll be with complete honesty, even when honesty is uncomfortable. How do I know you mean that? You don't. That's what trust is, believing someone even though you can't be certain. Lucas squeezed her hand gently. I spent months trying to find certainty, trying to prove that love could be trusted by creating controlled conditions. All I proved is that love can't exist without vulnerability, without risk. Emma was quiet, looking at their joined hands. If we tried again, it would have to be different, completely different. I know. No more lies, ever, about anything. Even if you think the truth will hurt me, you tell me anyway. Yes. And no tests, no experiments, no checking to see if I'm really committed or if I'm after your money. You either trust me or you don't. I trust you, Emma. I learned that lesson the hardest way possible. And you need to keep doing therapy. Keep working on whatever made you think deception was acceptable in the first place. I will, I am. Lucas took a breath. But Emma, I need something from you too. I need you to be honest about what you need, not just what Tyler needs, not just what you think will keep everyone happy, what you actually need for yourself. Emma looked surprised. What do you mean? Tyler says you've been using taking care of him as a way to avoid dealing with your own needs. I don't want to be another person you're taking care of at your own expense. If we do this, we do it as equals, partners. Not you adapting yourself to whatever you think I need. I don't know if I know how to do that. Then we'll figure it out together. Lucas paused. But Emma, I need to be clear about something. I have money, a lot of money. That's not going to change. And if we're together, that money will be part of our lives. I can't pretend to be poor and I won't apologize for being wealthy, but I also won't use money to control or manipulate. It's just a resource. It doesn't define who I am or what we are together. Emma had been quiet, absorbing this. I'm going to need time to adjust to that, to your actual life, not the version you showed me. Take all the time you need. We can go as slowly as you want. And what about Sophie? She's been through so much already. If we try again and it doesn't work, she loses us all over again. I've thought about that. A lot. Lucas had discussed this exact scenario with Dr. Morrison multiple times. I think we need to be honest with Sophie about what's happening. Tell her that we're trying to rebuild trust, that it's complicated, that there are no guarantees. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for when they're given age-appropriate truth. She called me last week, Emma said softly. She asked if I was mad at her for having a rich daddy. She thought maybe that's why I left. Lucas felt his heart crack. What did you tell her? I told her that adults sometimes have problems that have nothing to do with kids, that I could never be mad at her for something her father did, that I miss her very much. Emma's eyes filled with tears again. She asked if I could still be her friend even if I wasn't dating you. She said she doesn't have that many friends, and she really likes me. What did you say? I said yes, because I meant it. Lucas, whatever happens between us, I don't want to lose Sophie, or Tyler's friendship with her. They're good for each other. Then we make sure they stay friends, regardless of what happens with us. Lucas felt something loosening in his chest, something that had been tight for months. Emma, I'm not asking you to decide right now. Take whatever time you need. All I'm asking is that you don't close the door completely, that you leave it open just a little, in case someday you're ready to walk through it. Emma pulled her hand back, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup again. I can do that. I can leave it open. But Lucas, you need to understand, it might take a long time. Months, maybe longer, and even then, I might decide I can't do it, that the hurt is too deep. I understand. And in the meantime, you need to keep working on yourself. Not for me, for you, because the person who lied to me needs to heal whether I'm in his life or not. I know, I am. They'd sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything said and unsaid hanging between them. Finally, Emma stood, gathering her things. I should go. I have a shift in an hour. Lucas stood too. Can I walk you to the subway? Emma had hesitated, then nodded. They'd walked side by side through Brooklyn streets that felt simultaneously familiar and strange, like a place Lucas had visited in a dream. At the subway entrance, Emma had turned to face him. Thank you for being honest today, for not making excuses or minimizing what you did. Thank you for being willing to hear me out. Tyler's right, you know. You have changed. The Lucas I knew 3 months ago would have tried to fix this with a grand gesture. Money or gifts or some elaborate apology designed to make me forgive him faster. What would you have done if I had? I would have walked away and never looked back. Emma had smiled slightly, the first real smile Lucas had seen from her. But you didn't. You just listened and took responsibility. That matters. Before Lucas could respond, Emma had stepped forward and hugged him briefly. The embrace had lasted only seconds, but Lucas had felt the weight of it. Forgiveness, not quite given, but possibly building. A door not open, but no longer locked. Take care of yourself, Lucas. And take care of Sophie. You too, Emma. Take care of yourself and Tyler. And then she'd been gone, disappearing down the subway stairs, leaving Lucas standing on the corner with something that felt almost like hope. The weeks that followed were different from the months before. Lucas continued his therapy, continued being honest with Sophie, continued building a life that wasn't defined by work or wealth or defensive measures. He didn't contact Emma except through Tyler, respecting her need for space while staying connected enough to maintain Sophie and Tyler's friendship. Sophie had taken the news that Emma needed time with remarkable maturity. So you and Emma might get back together, but maybe not? That's right. And that's okay, even though it's confusing? That's okay. Sometimes the most important things are confusing. Sophie had thought about this. Mrs. Chen says real love is patient. She says if you love someone, you give them what they need, even if what they need is space. Mrs. Chen should write a book. I know, right? Tyler and Sophie's friendship had continued to grow, with Lucas driving Sophie to the Queen's apartment every Saturday. Sometimes Emma was there, sometimes she wasn't. When she was, she and Lucas were cordial, even friendly, but careful. They talked about Sophie and Tyler, about safe topics, rebuilding familiarity slowly. 3 months after the coffee shop conversation, Emma had invited Lucas and Sophie to dinner at her apartment. It had been the first time Lucas had been there socially since the confrontation, and walking in had felt surreal. Thank you for having us, Lucas had said, and Emma had smiled, a real smile, reaching her eyes. Thank you for coming. Tyler's been cooking all day. He wanted to show off his new skills. Dinner had been surprisingly comfortable. Tyler had made pasta from scratch, and the four of them had fallen into easy conversation. Sophie had told elaborate stories about school. Tyler had shared his college acceptance letters, MIT, as he'd dreamed, and Emma and Lucas had laughed at Sophie's dramatic retelling of a playground dispute. After dinner, while the kids were occupied with a movie, Emma and Lucas had found themselves alone in the kitchen doing dishes. "MIT," Lucas had said. "That's incredible. He worked so hard. The surgery helped, but mostly it's just Tyler being brilliant." Emma had handed Lucas a plate to dry. "He's trying to figure out housing. Dormitories are accessible, but he's worried about being far from support systems." Lucas had dried the plate carefully, choosing his words with equal care. "Emma, can I say something without you thinking I'm trying to buy your affection?" "Maybe. Depends on what it is." "MIT has excellent disability services. I have connections there through my company. We donate to their engineering program. I could make some calls, make sure Tyler has everything he needs. Not as a favor to you, but because he's family to Sophie, and to me." Emma had been quiet, her hands in the soapy water. "You really mean that, don't you? That he's family?" "I do. Emma, I know I started our relationship for the wrong reasons, but Tyler and Sophie's friendship is real. The way I feel about your brother is real. He's an exceptional person, and I want to help him succeed." Okay, you can make some calls, help with housing, but Lucas, this isn't about us. This is about Tyler having support at school. Don't read into it." "I won't." But something had shifted that night. Over the following weeks, Emma had started texting Lucas directly instead of only through Tyler. Small things at first. A funny video Sophie would like, a question about MIT housing options, a photo of something that reminded her of a conversation they'd had months ago. And Lucas had responded carefully, honestly, never pushing for more than Emma was offering, always making sure she knew she could set the pace. Sophie's 8th birthday had come, her second one since Lucas and Emma had met, and this time Emma and Tyler had both been there from the start. Emma had brought a cake she'd made herself, decorated with buttercream flowers that must have taken hours. Tyler had given Sophie a custom-coded game featuring a character that looked like her. "This is the best birthday ever," Sophie had declared, and Lucas had met Emma's eyes across the park, seeing something soft and hopeful there. Later, as the party was ending, Emma had pulled Lucas aside. "Can we talk? Soon? Like, actually talk about us? Not just logistics about the kids?" Lucas's heart had jumped. "Yes, whenever you're ready. Tuesday, same coffee shop?" "I'll be there." Tuesday had arrived with agonizing slowness, and Lucas had shown up early again, his stomach in knots. When Emma had walked in, she'd looked nervous but determined. "Hi," she'd said, sliding into the booth. "Hi. So, I've been thinking a lot about us, about what happened, about what could happen." Emma had taken a breath. "Lucas, I don't think I can go back to who we were. That relationship was based on lies, and trying to resurrect it feels wrong." Lucas had felt his heart sink, even though he had been preparing for this possibility for months. "But," Emma had continued, "I think maybe we could try being something new. Something built on honesty from the start. Not picking up where we left off, but starting over. Really starting over, with all the truth on the table." "You mean?" "I mean, I'd like to go on a date with you, a real date, where you're actually yourself and I'm actually myself, and we see if there's something real between us when we're not playing roles." Lucas had felt tears burning in his eyes. "Emma, I would love that more than anything. But I have conditions. Of course. We go slowly, glacially slowly. I need time to rebuild trust, and that's going to take a while." Emma had been counting on her fingers. "You're completely honest about your life, your money, your company, your schedule. No more hiding or pretending, and we do couples counseling. I need a neutral third party to help us navigate the money stuff and the trust stuff and all the complicated stuff." "Yes, to all of it, whatever you need. And Lucas, if at any point I feel like you're testing me again, like you're manipulating situations or checking to see if I really love you, we're done, immediately. No second chances after the second chance." "I understand, Emma. I promise." "Don't promise. Just show me. Promises are just words. I need actions." Lucas had nodded, understanding. He'd destroyed Emma's ability to trust promises. Now he needed to prove himself through choices, through consistent honesty, through showing up without agenda or manipulation. Their first official new date had been dinner at a nice restaurant in Manhattan. Lucas's choice, his world, his honest life. He'd picked Emma up from her apartment in his actual car, wearing his actual clothes, being his actual self. "This is weird," Emma had said when she'd seen his car. "This is really, really weird." Good weird or bad weird? I don't know yet. Ask me later. The restaurant had been elegant, expensive, and Emma had clearly been out of her comfort zone. But Lucas had been patient, had helped her navigate the menu, had shared stories about business dinners gone wrong that had made her laugh. "So this is your actual life?" Emma had said, looking around. "Private tables and wine that cost more than my monthly groceries. This is part of my life, but it's not the only part, or even the most important part." Lucas had leaned forward. "Emma, I know this is different from what you're used to. If it's too much, if it makes you uncomfortable, we can do something else. We can leave right now and get pizza." "No, I want to see your world, all of it. The good parts and the awkward parts and the parts that make me feel like I don't belong." Emma had met his eyes. "Because if we're going to do this, I need to know what I'm actually signing up for." They'd made it through dinner, and Lucas had been honest about everything: his company, his net worth, his daily routine that included personal assistants and board meetings, and decisions that affected hundreds of employees. Emma had listened, asked questions, and occasionally looked overwhelmed but never judgmental. "So when you said you were between things," Emma had said over dessert, "you actually meant you were CEO of a multi-million-dollar company." $400 million, actually, and yes. That's a pretty big thing to lie about. "I know, Emma, I know. And I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm processing." She'd poked at her creme brulee. "This is going to take some getting used to. The money, the lifestyle, the fact that you're this person I had no idea existed. We can go as slowly as you need." "You keep saying that. But Lucas, at some point, slow becomes stagnant. At some point, I need to either trust you or admit I can't." Emma had put down her spoon. "I'm choosing to trust you, not because you've earned it back completely, but because I'm choosing to believe people can change, that you've done the work, that you meant everything you said about being honest." "I did. I do." "Then let's do this. Really do this. Not some tentative maybe relationship, but actual commitment to figuring this out." Lucas had reached across the table, taking her hand. "I love you, Emma. I've loved you since you paid for our first date without hesitation. I've loved you through all my lies and all your hurt, and I'll love you through whatever comes next." Emma had squeezed his hand. "I love you too. Even though you're ridiculously rich and I'm still figuring out how I feel about that. Even though you hurt me worse than almost anyone ever has. I love who you are when you're not hiding. I love who we are together when we're honest." They'd left the restaurant hand in hand, and Lucas had felt like he was walking on air. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, but because they were trying, building something new from the ruins of what they'd destroyed. The next months were a careful dance of honesty and trust building. Lucas introduced Emma to his actual life, his penthouse, his office, his world of business meetings and charity galas and wealth management. Emma had been overwhelmed at times, but she'd been honest about her discomfort, and they'd worked through it in couples counseling. Tyler had started at MIT in the fall, and Lucas had helped him set up his dorm room with all the technology and accessibility equipment he needed. Tyler had hugged Lucas goodbye and whispered, "Thank you for being good to my sister, for real this time. I'm trying my best." "I know, that's why I'm not mad anymore." Sophie had flourished with Emma back in her life, and watching them together had reminded Lucas why he'd fallen in love in the first place. Emma's patience, her genuine care, her ability to see Sophie as a whole person rather than an obligation or accessory. It was everything Lucas had been looking for when he'd started his terrible experiment. 6 months after their first new date, Lucas had taken Emma to the park where they'd walked after their first coffee, back when everything had been a lie. They'd sat on a bench overlooking the pond, and Lucas had pulled out a small box. "Emma, wait." He'd seen her expression shift to panic. "It's not what you think. I'm not proposing. We're not ready for that, and I know it." Emma had relaxed slightly. "Then what is it?" It's a promise, not a promise that we'll get married someday, or that everything will be perfect, or that I'll never mess up again. I'm going to mess up. You're going to mess up. That's what humans do. So what's the promise? Lucas had opened the box, revealing a simple silver bracelet. The promise is honesty. Always. Even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, even when lying would be easier. This bracelet has an inscription. Emma had taken the bracelet, reading the engraved words: truth, trust, time. Truth because that's our foundation now, Lucas had explained. Trust because that's what we're building, and time because that's what we need. Time to keep growing, time to keep healing, time to become the people who deserve each other. Emma had been crying, but smiling. Lucas, this is perfect. Help me put it on? He'd fastened the bracelet around her wrist, and Emma had kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. Not the promise of perfection, but the promise of trying, of choosing each other every day, even when it was difficult. I love you, Emma had whispered against his lips. I love you too. Honestly, completely. For real this time. They'd stayed in the park as the sun set, talking about their plans: Tyler's upcoming winter break, Sophie's school play, the food truck Emma was finally saving for, the charitable foundation Lucas wanted to start with Emma's input. They talked about the future not as something certain, but as something they were building together, one honest conversation at a time. A year after their first new date, Emma moved into Lucas's penthouse, not because Lucas had pressured her, but because she was ready. Tyler had his own room for visits home from MIT, and Sophie had been thrilled to have Emma around more often. Is Emma going to be my stepmom? Sophie had asked one evening. Someday, maybe, Lucas had answered honestly. But that's up to Emma and me both. It's not something we're rushing into. That's okay. Mrs. Chen says good things take time. Mrs. Chen is always right. Emma had kept her job at the diner for another 6 months before finally admitting she was ready to pursue her food truck dream. Lucas had helped with startup costs, but he'd been careful to structure it as an investment, not a gift, equal partnership, not charity. Emma's truck, Emma's kitchen, had become popular in their neighborhood, serving comfort food with Emma's special touch. Tyler had graduated from MIT with honors and had received multiple job offers at major tech companies. He'd chosen one in New York so he could stay close to Emma and Sophie, and Lucas had helped him find an accessible apartment that Tyler could actually afford on his salary. Again, helping without controlling, supporting without managing. 2 years after Lucas had confessed his lies in that Brooklyn coffee shop, he'd brought Emma back to the same bench in the park. This time, when he'd pulled out a small box, Emma had known what it was. Emma Cole, I know I don't deserve you. I know I started our relationship in the worst possible way, but I also know that you've made me a better man, not because you've changed me, but because you've loved me enough to let me change myself. Lucas had opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring. Will you marry me? Will you build a real family with Sophie and me? Will you keep choosing honesty and trust and time, even when it's hard? Emma had been crying again, but her smile was radiant. Yes. Yes to all of it. But Lucas, I need you to know something. What? I would have said yes, even if this ring came from a vending machine. Even if you were actually poor like you pretended to be. Because I don't love you for your money. I love you for your honesty, for your growth, for the way you love Sophie and Tyler, for the way you show up every single day and choose to be better than you were yesterday. I know. That's why I love you. They'd gotten married 6 months later in a small ceremony with just their family and closest friends. Sophie had been the flower girl, Tyler had walked Emma down the aisle, and Marcus had been Lucas's best man. Jessica had sent her regrets, which everyone had agreed was the best gift she could have given. During the reception, Tyler had given a toast that had everyone laughing and crying. When Emma first told me she was dating someone, I was skeptical. My sister has terrible taste in men, present company excluded, Lucas. But then I met Lucas and I thought, okay, this guy is different. He's broke and struggling, but he's genuine. He cares about Emma for real. The crowd had laughed, and Tyler had grinned. Then I found out Lucas was actually rich. and had been lying the whole time, and I thought, well, there goes that theory. My sister still has terrible taste, but then something interesting happened. Lucas didn't just apologize and move on. He actually did the work. He went to therapy, he changed his behavior, he became someone worthy of my sister's love. And that's when I realized Emma doesn't have terrible taste. She has exceptional taste. She chose someone who was capable of growth, capable of change, capable of becoming the person she believed he could be. Tyler had raised his glass. So here's to Emma and Lucas, to honesty, trust, and time, to second chances and hard-won happiness, to love that survives lies and comes out stronger on the other side. Later that night, after the reception had ended and they were alone in their hotel room, Emma had taken off her bracelet and her ring, setting them side by side on the nightstand. "What are you doing?" Lucas had asked. "Looking at them, thinking about what they mean." Emma had turned to face him. "The bracelet represents where we've been, the honesty we built after the lies. The ring represents where we're going, the life we're building together, and the fact that they're both simple, nothing flashy or expensive, that's perfect. Because our relationship isn't about grand gestures or proving anything. It's about showing up, being present, telling the truth." Lucas had pulled her close. "I spent so long testing love, trying to prove it couldn't be trusted. And then I found you, and you proved that love doesn't need to be tested. It just needs to be given and received with honesty." "And forgiveness?" Emma had added. "Don't forget forgiveness, because I had to forgive you, and you had to forgive yourself. And we both had to learn that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward despite the past." They'd held each other in the quiet of their hotel room, two people who'd found each other in the worst way possible and had somehow built something beautiful from the wreckage. Lucas thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago, cynical, defensive, so convinced that love was transactional that he'd designed elaborate tests to prove it. That man seemed like a stranger now. Emma had taught him that love couldn't be tested or proven or guaranteed. It could only be trusted. And trust required vulnerability, honesty, and the courage to believe in someone even when you couldn't be certain of the outcome. Years later, when Sophie asked about how Lucas and Emma had met, they'd been honest. Age-appropriately honest, but honest nonetheless. They'd explained that sometimes people make terrible mistakes out of fear, and that love means working through those mistakes rather than running from them. "So Daddy lied to Emma?" 12-year-old Sophie had asked. "Yes, for a long time." "And Emma forgave him?" "Eventually, after he did a lot of work to become someone worthy of forgiveness." Sophie had considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "Mrs. Chen says that's what courage is. Not being perfect, but choosing to be better even when it's hard." Lucas had looked at Emma, seeing his whole life reflected in her eyes, the lies he'd told, the hurt he'd caused, the work they'd both done to build something real. And underneath it all, the simple truth that had been there from the beginning. Emma had loved him when she thought he had nothing, and she loved him now that she knew he had everything. Because what she loved wasn't his circumstances, but his character, not his performance, but his presence, not his tests, but his truth. "Mrs. Chen," Lucas had said, pulling both his daughter and his wife close, "is absolutely right." And in the warm afternoon light of their home, a home filled with honesty and laughter and hard-won trust, Lucas finally understood what he'd been searching for all along. Love didn't need to be tested. It only needed to be trusted, tended, and given the time to grow into something stronger than any lie could break.